So, to my audience members and to Destiny's, yeah, we are going to have discussion on in my opinion, the corrupting influence of money in politics, specifically corporate lobbying. So, I believe that corporate lobbying has a negative effect, a net negative effect on public discourse and policymaking. I believe Destiny has a different opinion on all of it.
Yeah, so my opinion is corporate lobbying, I think is necessary. I think that lobbying is a good thing. We should be allowed to lobby congressmen. There might be times where it can have a negative or deleterious effect on politics, but I think that it is way, way, way smaller than most people say. And I think that there are other things that are way more important to focus on than lobbying, which is just scapegoated for every problem we have in our electoral system.
Okay. I don't disagree with you that um, huh. Okay, so I don't disagree with you that it's lobbying can be quite useful, and that it's scapegoated so that all problems end up on the hands of lobbyists. And that's definitely not the case. There are many ways why our system is the way it is. There are many factors, many stakeholders. Lobbyists are just one of them, but they are, in my opinion, a negative one. So, yeah.
When you say negative,
Hmm.
I'm curious. Do you think we should like ban lobbying?
So, no. I think that we should ban their influence through money specifically, but not the fact that they are interfacing with our congressmen or lawmakers in general. So,
What do you mean when you say that? When you say ban money in general?
ban money in general. So, I think that direct campaign contributions should be ended. Instead, we should have
Well,
public
so
financing.
yeah, so direct campaign contributions, you're limited on the amount of those you can make, right? So
Mhm.
like $5,000 or something.
Mhm.
Do you think they should be banned from like fundraising for people?
Yeah, yeah. In terms of fundraising, so you are limited, but you can get a tremendous amount. Like if you get individual like executives
Mhm.
donating to a campaign, of course, going to dinners and fundraising there, perfect way
Mhm.
to raise money and to influence lawmakers in that way.
Okay, so let's say that I think that climate change is something that's very important. And let's say that I feel like there's local candidate X who's going to support climate change better than any other candidate on the ballot.
Hmm.
Let's say that I want to have like a conservation dinner at like a place next to a zoo. And I want to host a dinner where a whole bunch of people can come and we can buy tickets to the dinner for $300 and that money goes towards like supporting the campaign of a particular individual. Should that type of activity be banned? We're not allowed to support those people like
Um,
that.
Sorry. Sorry, I screwed up. Sorry, I screwed
Mhm.
up something on my stream. No, we're good now. Sorry. Um, let's try it again. Should you?
Yeah, so, like, let's say that let's say that I'm a climate change advocate,
mm,
okay? Let's say that I support candidate X because I think they're gonna do things that are going to make, the world a better place for climate
mm,
change. Let's say that to help fundraise for them, let's say that I decide to host, like, a dinner next to a zoo, like some conservation area, and as a part of hosting that dinner, people can buy $400 tickets, and then those go to the campaign of the person I'm supporting. Should
mm.
that type of, like, lobbying be illegal?
Yes. So I think that instead the best type of lobbying would be ones that simply provide support to individuals, to policymakers in terms of expertise. I think that's the biggest thing, biggest advantage of lobbying is to provide that expertise that so many lawmakers don't have in any individual area. It's I don't particularly care the issue. So now you're saying like, well, there's some issues that I might agree with. True, but those are flooded. Those are completely overwhelmed by business interests. Business interests by far um, uh, take up most. I believe this two thirds of lobbying is done by corporate business interests. So for those few interests that I might be in favor of, they are up against a mountain of money that they can't compete with.
Well, so I guess what I'm curious about then is that like, well, I guess maybe we could just discuss this on this level right here. So I feel like that would be, it feels like a pretty big infringement to free speech that I wouldn't be allowed to host like a dinner to fundraise for a candidate that I like. Are these candidates just completely and totally out of luck then? They just have no hope if they're not already individually incredibly wealthy of winning any type of election or?
Oh, okay. In terms of the candidates themselves, I think in terms of if you even the playing field in terms of public funding, then everyone has that same playing field. Like everyone has an equal chance of making it. So yeah, did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
So then, you would say that like, how would you? So you're so I guess it's like the public argument or the public funding argument. You'd say that any spending done on an election has to come from public, like a public fund or something, or
Not any spending. So I would say that maybe we could still do some ad buys, right? That could be possibly a thing, but it should be severely limited as to how much money can be spent. Not an unlimited amount of money being spent there, but like in terms of you could count all kinds of things as contributions. So you yourself advocating on behalf of a lawmaker, that would be okay. I like I wouldn't limit that. I wouldn't
well,
limit.
yeah. So that's already those are already taken care of. These are called like in kind donations,
Hmm.
right? Like you would
Hmm.
already account for stuff like this.
Hmm.
But I guess it just seems that like at this point we're restricting the people that can run have to be really wealthy already to do so. Because like if a poor candidate, let's say like a school teacher runs, they're never going to be able to pay for ads or fund anything. And it sounds like we're saying basically they can't raise money from outside sources ever to do it.
I would say we should fully fund things publicly. Absolutely fully fund things, everything public, and so that
So in terms
everyone.
of fully funding everything publicly, then there would be no individual spend on campaigns. It would all be the same amount of money funded publicly.
Um. Yes.
Okay, then how do we deal with like primaries? Does every single person that wants to run in a primary get equal funding, or like can like 30 people run in a primary system and then they all just get money funded, or
Sure. Okay. In the primary system, that might be different. So that might be a different set of rules. So you could have a situation where, in terms of signatures, right? Like the whoever can get the most signatures, they get maybe a proportional amount of funding, right? Or if you can somehow show that through polling that you have a certain amount of support, that maybe you can get more funding. But even then, that's a little iffy. But there's also all kinds of ways. We don't have to have, like, for instance, equal rules for primaries and for general elections.
yeah. So my well, that seems like it seems like we need to have equal rules, right?
Do we? Why?
Well, because then you're shifting all of the burden onto the primary system. What's going to happen is people will just spend hundreds of millions of dollars in all the primaries, and then the general election will just be whoever spent the most on the primary,
No,
right?
no,
If
no.
you're
I'm
making
saying
it
it's still publicly financed, even then, during the primaries. But in terms of exactly how that money is allocated, that might be different.
okay, so if you have two candidates and one is massively more popular than another candidate in a given city, state,
Mm-hmm.
country, they're still both required that they can only have like basic, essentially what is like the same amount of publicity per person. So if one candidate has the support of 95% of the population and the other candidate has the support of 5% of the population, both of them are allocated like an equal amount of money in terms of how much they're allowed to spend on advertising and everything.
Yes, I mean if it's through advertising that they're reaching the voters, it's through advertising they're reaching voters, then they should have uh, an equal platform to do so, right? Yeah. Um.
Okay, I think we just fundamentally disagree on like the structure of like that. That to me would be incredibly unsatisfying.
Mm.
Like if there is some candidate that has like that I like fully support, it's a pretty big restriction on my rights that there's literally nothing I can do for this candidate. I'm just barred from doing anything to
No,
help
I
them
didn't
basically.
say that. Of course, you can help them through knocking on doors and all that. You
Well,
can
but these things are
volunteer.
all like these are all in-kind donations.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, so in-kind donations then are okay under your
Yeah, I
system?
said that previously. Did you miss that? Like you speaking on behalf of a candidate could be an in-kind donation, and that's okay. Yeah, I'm talking about corporate money within politics, specifically that. That's the
Yeah,
biggest.
I think that there's a lot of different ways that there's a lot of different ways that that money can be spent,
Mm,
which is what is I guess confusing me. So
mm.
because now if we're talking in kind donation, so for instance, if we were to pay for a bunch of people to go canvas or door knock in a certain area, even if we don't donate that money to the campaign directly, that's still money being spent. It could be spent by a corporation, and that's also considered an in kind donation.
Yeah, I mean, so okay, so the point of this is not to absolutely even the playing field because that's impossible. Right? Like, I wish we could, but it's not. But we can't completely even the playing field here. The best we can do, though, is try to level it so that people aren't facing a mountain instead of maybe more a steep climb over a hill. So I understand that there will be I understand that some people will have uh, some interests will still have advantages, but that's fine. That's fine. Instead, we can counter those interests, those advantages through people power, for instance.
So people power, so whatever side can mobilize like the most number of volunteers or something, basically.
Maybe if that, yes, that's one way. That's one way of doing things. Yeah, sure.
Okay. I guess like I understand your point. I just completely disagree.
That's fine.
It just feels like a huge infringement on my First Amendment rights that I'm not able to organize for or I guess like organize like dinners to help a candidate or get them like more money at all. Like they're just restricted to whatever budget I guess they personally have. You're saying that also you'd restrict their personal spending on elections too as well, I guess.
Yes, I would restrict their personal spending as well. Again, through all publicly financed elections. Again, you can organize for them. You can organize a dinner. Certainly, you can actually organize a dinner, and the uh, candidate can
Wait, how
come.
is organizing a dinner not like similar to like fundraising for somebody or
Uh,
lobbying?
you can organize a dinner where the candidate can come and talk to their constituents, but they can't fundraise from that dinner.
How well, how does that work? Because like I'm
How
sure
does
that some
that
people
not
that go
work?
to the well, because I'm sure that people that go to the dinner are gonna wanna donate to the campaign, right? Like, do you just ban them from donating for, like, a month after going to a dinner, or
No, I'm saying again, there would be no donations whatsoever.
yeah, but I'm saying, like, if I go to a dinner for a candidate and I really like that candidate, I'm probably gonna be motivated to go to their website and donate afterwards, right?
But if there's the donation system has been demolished, then you wouldn't be doing that.
Oh, wait, so you wanna get rid of all campaign contributions?
So I think that I think that it would be very difficult, extremely difficult, to disaggregate like which money is coming from like which business interests if we had campaign contributions coming from individuals, right? So individuals, a great way again that or industries funnel money to individuals is through their employees, right? So employees will go out to these dinners or whatever, however they do so, and they give the maximum amount. So instead, if we limited that and then had all funding through public, all of it coming through public funding, then we would level a playing field in that way.
Gotcha. Don't you think this would hurt certain candidates then who gained like widespread notoriety through public support? So for instance, like candidates like Yang or Bernie Sanders, then just nobody would ever like know about these guys or their popularity would be
Why?
severely reduced?
Why wouldn't they know about them?
Well, part of Bernie Sanders and his ability to like gain so much recognition has been like the huge amount of fundraising he did. Like I think Bernie Sanders was second only to Donald Trump in terms of fundraising. Like his average $27 donation from everybody around the country. It seemed like that was a really big part of his campaign.
Yeah, I mean that was part of it, but the other part of it was the organizing efforts, right? The organizing
But
efforts
which
is
are
not.
paid for with campaign contributions.
Yeah, I know.
That's how they pay for that.
Yeah. So we fully fund, especially, and again, these things are in terms of the levels of amount of funding changes depending on like the race, right? So obviously presidential races would have a lot more funding.
Wait,
So
but would you just allocate the same amount of funding to every candidate then? So Bernie and now Tulsi Gabbard and now Ben Carson, all these people get the same amount of money allocated to them?
sure, why not? Like again, or you can either do that, or you can do it in terms of support, like some sort of tangible support that you can show, like whether it be through signatures or some other method. But
So for the last race, then Bernie Sanders would have had significantly less money to spend, and more money would have gone to people like Steyer, would have gotten more money. Tulsi Gabbard would have gotten more money. Amy Klobuchar, these people all would have had elevated spending. Yang, all these people would have had elevated spending, and Bernie Sanders' spending would have gone down. Is that like an outcome that you think is favorable or good?
elevated, why would they have elevated spending? And again, so
Because
what
Bernie Sanders out fundraised all these people, so that he would necessarily have less money to spend, and they would all have more money to spend. He'd be getting a
oh, I
lesser
see. Oh,
share.
I see what you're saying. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So I would, I would say that most important thing is to operate through organizing. So it doesn't matter to me that other candidates have equal amounts. Like if they can show, if they can organize and use that money to push their policy objectives, then or their policy objectives to the people, and that's fine. I don't actually care at all that they have more. I mean, what difference does it make to me, right? I think if
Well, the difference is Bernie Sanders would be less popular almost necessarily, right? Because now
why
every
would
other
he be
candidate.
less popular? His popularity doesn't necessarily rely on the amount of money he had to spend, but his messaging, right? So everyone
There's
has
only
equal
like, yeah,
platform.
so there's like we have to understand that there's limited resources. There are limited people that can volunteer for political campaigns. There's limited
Absolutely.
advertising spots on radio and TV. There's limited ads that somebody can see online. So if we start making it so every other candidate has similar to Bernie Sanders levels of spending, or we decrease Bernie Sanders level of spending, then more people are going to volunteer for other campaigns that are now going to have the money to pay them. More advertising spots are going to go to non-Bernie Sanders candidates that are now going to have the money allocated to them. Bernie Sanders is going to have a smaller ground game. He's going to have a smaller internet online presence. Like these things all like just they necessarily follow. It'll have to be the case.
That's okay. Everyone should have an equal playing field. So, like, I'm not trying to skew the playing field to a candidate that I prefer. I'm trying to even the playing field.
Huh. Okay. I guess I just totally disagree. I think if a candidate can hit that level of popularity, like regardless of, I don't really support a lot of Bernie Sanders policies because he's a bit further left of me. But like if he's able to gather that much popular support and that many people want to move behind him and that many
Yeah.
people want to contribute to his campaign, I think he has the right to raise that money. I would feel bad telling him like, nope, sorry, I don't care how popular you are. We need to make space for all of these other candidates that are far less popular.
Okay. So, first of all, you uh, do you agree that corporate lobbying, well, what negative effects do you think corporate lobbying has?
Um, I mean, theoretically, if a politician is like completely on the fence about something, and he could go either way, depending on depending on like his electorate, it's possible that a corporate contribution or corporate support might push him in a direction.
Hmm. Okay. So I think that it's actually less of that. I think in the end, the real big problem with corporate lobbying is instead that it supports people who already agree. So oftentimes it often supports people who already agree. And then through them, through those politicians, they convince their fellow politicians, right? So it gives them more influence, more resources to make their case, right? So it gives
Do you think
them
it's going to influence politicians to vote in ways that their constituents disagree with?
uh, corporate lobbying, absolutely. And in fact, I have plenty of evidence to say that's the case.
Yeah, so this is the thing that I used to believe this a lot, and then this is what moved me off of this point completely. I just don't see evidence of all of these wildly unpopular policies that get passed
Sure.
that corporate lobbyists somehow like
Okay.
are supporting. Yeah, I don't know
Okay.
what that system is.
Sure. All right. Well, let's go through it. There was the case of the DEA, right? The Drug Enforcement Agency. So the pharmaceutical industry successfully lobbied Congress to make it easier to distribute opioids across America communities and thwart the Drug Enforcement Administration's efforts to halt the addiction crisis. So drug companies, including Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, CVS Health, and the National Association of Drug Stores lobbied for a new bill that made it virtually impossible for the DEA to freeze suspicious narcotics shipments from drug distributors. Right? There was basically a level of evidence that had to be reached until the DEA could halt suspicious drug shipments. Like these individuals, these interests, lobbied to raise that level to make it very difficult the DA to actually do its job, and one of the jobs I actually agree with it. The U.S.
Okay,
government.
wait. So real quick, can you rephrase this or can you link me this? Are you saying
Sure,
that the
yeah.
DEA
Okay, so if you
to
look at and to everyone who's watching, if you go into my VC chat, if you join my Discord and go into the VC chat, I'll be putting all the links that I'm referencing there. So let
Mhm.
me throw that there. One second. Okay, that was that article from CNN. Okay. So that's calling for an investigation of this particular incident. Uh, so, called the Insurance Patient Access and Effective Drug Enforcement Act. The bill's sponsors included Pennsylvania Republican Senator Tom Marino, Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, and Tennessee Republican Representative Marsha Blackburn. All work for constituencies that are heavily affected by the opioid epidemic. However,
Mm-hmm.
each raised at least six figures in campaign contributions for the pharmaceutical industry. Marino got nearly 100,000, Blackburn got 120,000, and Hatch 177,000. I mean, these were all, of course, co-sponsors. The law, which was supposed to further define imminent danger, raised the bar for evidence on the suspension orders of drug shipments. At the height of the opioid epidemic, inexplicably, suspensions slowed down. So the DEA was doing a certain number of suspensions. These suspensions were slowed down of drug shipments. The bill was written by Lyden Barber, a former DEA Associate Chief Counsel who left to work for the drug industry in 2011. So another part of this is the revolving door that's very well known in Washington, which former regulators or policymakers end up on the side of the corporate influence, corporate interests. So yeah.
And when is this? Okay, so this call for action was in 2017.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. Do you know if he won or lost his next election?
Oh, Marino. So Marino was later hired by Donald Trump to be some sort of a drug czar, not the drug czar, but some other position. And
Mm-hmm.
then the like you see Manchin, Joe Manchin, calling for an investigation of this person if like the media reports happen to be true. So that should be within the article.
It's nominated by leaders. Okay, just reading about it.
Take your time.
Okay, so it sounds like after he did this, he was Trump tried to hire him on, so he didn't get to run in an election after this. Endorsed Donald Trump. Damn, he won hugely. And it looks like he raised around. He's raised almost $3 million. How much money has he raised total from the pharmaceutical industry?
That particular, I don't know how much total, but according to article, the Tom Marino specifically was
Mm-hmm.
nearly 100,000, and then more for the other two that are specifically named.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess stuff like this would be pretty bad.
I,
Or pretty shitty, sure.
I've got more examples. So there's the weakening of Dodd-Frank. Oh, let me put this article in chat and as well. Once
Mm-hmm.
again, everyone, if you want to follow along, join my Discord server and go into the channel labeled VC Chat. I'll be placing all my references there. So here's another one. So, in terms of weakening Dodd-Frank, in 2013, Citigroup essentially wrote a crucial parts of a bill that would exempt large swaths of Wall Street trades from regulation. The two paragraphs were copied word from word from a corporate lawyer named Michael Bopp, which is a weird name, but whatever. Wall Street groups helped fundraisers for lawmakers who co-sponsored the bill. At one dinner, corporate executives and lobbyists paid up to $2,500 to dine in a private room of a Greek restaurant just blocks away from the Capitol. Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, Democratic New York, co-sponsored the bill, championing by Citigroup. Okay, Citigroup and other major banks used a similar approach in other derivatives bill. Under Dodd-Frank, banks must push some derivatives trading into separate units that are not backed by the government's insurance fund. The goal was to isolate this risky trading. The provision exempted many derivatives from the requirement, but some Republicans proposed striking the so-called push-out provision is what it's called, altogether. After objections were raised about the Republican plan, Citigroup lobbyists sent around the bank's own compromise proposal that simply exempted a wider array of derivatives. That recommendation, put forth in late 2011, was largely part of the bill approved by the House Committee on May 7th and is now pending before. Oh, and this is an old article, so this is, yeah. This,
Mhm.
yeah. So, as with the as that's the DEA example, I don't believe that these bills, right, uh, these laws, these policy changes, actually benefit the individual's constituents, right?
Why
Who
do you say that for the case of this for this derivatives thing?
So, constituency actually was asking for less regulation on financial
Well, we're
institutions?
not just
So,
saying just more or less regulation doesn't really make sense, right? We're talking about particular types of regulation. Not everybody is for all regulation, and nobody is for no like that doesn't really make sense, right?
well, sure.
Like we can think of sometimes of regulations that would be bad, and we can think of regulations that would be good. So
Of
just looking at
course.
it as more or less. So it sounds like what was suggested by some of these financial institutions is that there are certain types of derivatives that come under more scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay or safer for certain banks to be allowed to engage in certain types of derivative markets, but not others.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the exemption that they suggested, I guess.
Yes, yes. So, for this was not banning these
Hmm.
trades, right? These trades were allowed to happen. These are
Well,
simply
but we were talking about doing these without being government backed, right?
Yeah. So, well,
Hmm.
that's one of those things. Others
Hmm.
is simply the scrutinizing these derivatives, right? And so I would say that uh, that there is no constituency that would want less scrutinization of these trades, right? So the
Well,
fact
it's
that
not
they
talking about the scrutiny of them. It's talking about whether or not they're allowed to take place with a government backing, with a
okay,
government insurance fund, right?
um, so exempted in-house derivatives trades between Elizabeth. Two paragraphs copied from the lawyer, so I'm just reading for this again. Um, Minutes, not backed by current. Yeah. So.
So the point was that under Dodd-Frank, it looks like banks had to push some of the derivatives trading into
Mhm.
separate houses where those houses are not backed by, like, I'm guessing this is FDIC insurance, but maybe some other type of government insurance fund. And apparently, what some of these financial institutions fired back with is they're saying, well, hold on, there are certain types of derivative trading these are okay and these should be backed by the government, but they're also heavily scrutinized. So we think it's still acceptable to do certain forms of derivatives trading because the government like looks at these a lot more and they should be safe enough to be considered for some form of insurance from the government. This doesn't seem like wildly controversial, I don't think.
Well, certainly it actually was. That's why the very fact that these bills were simply written by these banks, right? The fact that
Well, to be clear, these bills aren't written by the banks. This
no,
was
I mean,
like,
no, I mean, sorry. The provision within this bill was actually written
well, of
by.
course, it came from them, right? Of course, it was written by
Yes,
them.
exactly. So exactly what I said. So I'm saying that my point is that there is no constituency that wants to weaken these rules. That's my only goal there. That
Well, but wait, well, we don't know that. That's incredibly simplistic. Like, not
okay,
everybody
sure.
wants to overregulate everything from the bank. In fact, there's a lot of consumers that are okay with some bank behavior that's incredibly damaging to the country. So, yeah, I don't.
Sorry. Do you have polling that says that people, especially at this point in time, wanted less scrutiny on the banks? That these people were being represented. This was their policymakers acting on their will. I would love to see that. And beyond that, I still have more examples.
Let's see. So it was either under Clinton or Bush when they began to expand the types of insurances that would be available for people that were getting loans for houses that shouldn't have been able to get loans for houses. So the colloquial way to refer to these were like Nina loans, right? You could
Hmm.
get loans with no income verification, no asset verification, and these were wildly popular among a lot of people because people saw expanding the ability, the American dream of people to own homes as being like a fundamental part of the American experience. So I think that these policies were generally pretty
But these
popular.
aren't the same. We can
No,
understand
but
these
I'm
aren't the
saying like
same.
that's an example of like or of a lack of regulation that the American
So
public would push for that's really damaging to
I
our
agree
system.
that some people, and there are some regulations that could be damaging or
Mhm.
unhelpful. I'm saying
Sure.
that this is not an example of that, right? As far as I can tell,
I
this
don't
is not an
know if there
example of
if
that.
well, I don't know if
And
there
they don't
I don't know if there exists polling. First of all, you don't have polling data on this either. I know that for a fact because the idea. I don't think
exactly.
you can pull. I don't think that you can pull people and say, like, how do you feel specifically about 4 forms of derivative trading and whether or not they should be within or outside of government insurance packages? I think these issues are just simply too
So
complicated to individually pull somebody on,
exactly.
right?
So this is another part of the problem of corporate lobbying, right? Is that it's
Well, but we don't
not.
know if that's the problem, though. This might be a good thing, right? Have
So
you demonstrated this is even
so
a bad
once
thing?
again, so part of the problem of corporate lobbying is that it often concentrates on rules and policies and regulations that are not within the public eye, right? So these things that are often times very complicated, very complex pieces of legislation, right? That may uh, skew regulation in their favor, skew the markets in their favor. That'll happen, and these things won't be on the radar of the public, right? But they could still be very important. They could still be things that, like for instance, like these derivatives could be a problem within the future if they aren't publicly.
Yeah, but it might have been a problem too if they were banned from trading, or if they weren't able to be insured by the government as well, right? Like you would have to show me something that shows it, like, oh well, these forms of derivative trading. If most people would have known about them, they would have been dramatically against these. Or these forms of derivative trading are harming consumers today that take place under government insurance. I don't know if that's the case.
Hmm. So I would say that that these trades, right? That uh, actually that I don't trust the these financial institutions to be the ones to actually decide these things, right? So I think
Well, but it
that
wasn't them that decided. They proposed it,
they
and
literally
then
did. They literally did. They literally.
no, they literally did not. Right?
So I'm saying they
All they can
proposed.
Yes, they can propose. Okay, but the word you used earlier was decided. They're not
Oh,
deciding anything. The
okay.
ultimate decision is on Congress to pass the law.
And
So
I'm
they can
saying that
suggest
with corporate,
legislation of their own, but it's
sure.
up to Congress to choose whether or not they want to pass it.
And I'm saying with that corporate influence, with that corporate influence, that it's not simply that lawmakers are looking at these different interests, right, and deciding which one is greater, which one is better for the public good, right? Instead, there is a specific weight being placed on the side of business interests. So whether these specific trades are good or bad, like it's obscured by the
Yeah,
fact.
I understand that all of these things are obscured. I understand that, but like, I think it's good that the financial industry should have some representation in Congress
You
for as
should.
to how bills get passed.
I agree.
Yeah, because Congress are financially illiterate. These guys don't know fucking anything.
So
There's like 2 people in Congress that know anything about how any of these types of markets
I
work.
don't disagree with you there.
So I think that having those types of like corporate influences to say like, hey, well, here I think that if you this might seem like a good idea if you ban this, but it'll cause this or this or this to happen. So here's our input,
I,
and then ultimately at the end of the day, Congress decides what legislation they want to pass
I'm
on that
not
or not.
fighting you
Like,
on that. I agree with you. I
well, but
100%
to
agree
be
with you.
clear, you are fighting me on that because you're
No, I'm
saying
not.
all forms of this should be illegal.
No, I
Wait,
didn't say
so
that.
do you think that corporations should be allowed to propose legislative changes?
Yes, exactly. But going back to that article, right, talking
Uh huh.
about the money that was exchanged, right, and the support that came with it. Right. So if it's possible that everything you said here is correct, absolutely possible. That Senator or Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, Democrat of New York, right, absolutely believes, right, that as far as his understanding through his research that this change is actually beneficial, right? And actually be doing his constituents very good. Like it's a
Hmm.
possibility that that's the case, right? But he didn't reach that. He didn't reach that without the influence of money in his pocket, right? In his campaign coffers.
Well, I guess
So
it's hard to know that they might have. I mean, I imagine corporations would still be proposing the same type of legislative changes. I guess
yeah,
you're just saying
yeah.
you're arguing that in a counterfactual that they wouldn't have implemented those changes if the financial support wouldn't have come along with it.
I'm saying I'm saying that corporate lobbying. I'm saying that corporate lobbying has shown itself to be extremely profitable practice. In fact, if it wasn't a profitable practice, then these corporations would not be involved in it at all.
Well, I think when we say extremely profitable, we need to qualify that a
Oh,
little because
sure,
it
I
seems like a
can.
lot of corporations like don't really spend that much
Sure, no
money on corporate
problem.
lobbying. When you look at like all
Um,
the other types of investments they make.
no problem. In 2012, business interests. Oh, I can. This is another article. I'll put that in the chat. 1 second, please. It's a Huffington Post article. Um, so, uh, in 2012, business interests spent 2.57 billion dollars in lobbying Congress and the executive branch, more than three-quarters of total spending by all politically active organizations. For every $1 spent by unions and public interest groups on direct lobbying that year, business interests spent $34. So it vastly outnumbers anyone else.
How
So
much? Well, okay. Those two comparisons make no sense because, of course, corporations probably have way higher pools of money to draw from. So I'd
yeah,
expect them to be spending more.
I
But the
agree.
question is, what are the revenues of those companies?
Okay,
Because
so
if you're telling me that they spent $2 billion, but their revenues were totaling if you're talking industry wide, in the hundreds of billions, or potentially even in the trillions of dollars, if we're talking the entire U.S. economy, then spending a couple $1 billion doesn't really make it seem like that
so
profitable of an activity.
don't worry, I got an answer for you. Corporations got $4.4 trillion in federal contracts and subsidies. For every dollar spent on influencing politics, the nation's most politically active corporations received $760 from the government.
Wait, can you link me this
No,
thing you're
it's
looking
in
at?
the same article, the Huffington Post article. It's in those bullet points right there. And there's links to all these things within that article.
Hold on one second.
Take your time.
2012 business interests spent 2.57 billion lobbying Congress and the executive branch. For every $1 spent by unions and public interest groups on direct lobbying that year, business interests spent $34 of the $100. 5% businesses. By contrast, diffuse interest groups and unions have never collectively accounted for more than 3 of the top 100 spending organizations. Business groups dramatically outnumber public interest groups at the sale level too. This all makes sense, of course. Public suffers. Okay. Okay. The political agenda is push a focus on business interests, not the needs of the public. Policymakers increasingly spend their time on the issues that matter to business groups, left off the table the concerns of broader sectors of the population. Let's see this here. Let's see. Abstract. Okay. There's been a long-standing concern about inequality in the representation of interests by organized groups. The lobbying community in Washington is dominated by corporations. That leads to include the inequality in interest groups organizations not a major problem for American democracy. However, my colleagues suggest inequality in interest group representation presents itself in the agenda-setting stage. They find that the public agenda is quite different from the lobbying agenda. That is, types of issues that are most important to the public differ from the types of issues that lobbyists bring. Public opinion data in more detail. Certain publics. We find additional evidence the lobbying agenda does not reflect the policy positions of the public. So let me see if I can find this paper
Take your time.
in browser. So one of the I don't know if I've looked at this one in particular, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the big issues with a lot of these studies in the past is that what the study will do is I should have this saved. What the study will do is they will look at what the public believes about a certain thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll look at how what I guess wealthy people or what corporations are pushing for, and then they'll
Mm-hmm.
compare that to the agenda. And what they find is that oftentimes it seems like there's an agenda that's represented more by like lobbyists and businesses
Mm-hmm.
than the public writ large.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with these polls is that they just go by what the public wants. But politicians don't care what the public wants. Politicians are supposed to care what voters want. The problem is that we don't vote uniformly as a public base.
Mm-hmm.
So polling on public opinion is irrelevant. What you have to poll on are voter opinions or likely voters. It's possible that this study does that, though. Let me just find the methodology real quick. Hold on.
Okay, take your time.
More considerations. Paper reviews some conflicting findings in recent research on policy make the case for only working several data sources. Which measure of public opinion is used? Concerns allowing should we find evidence and okay. Case for equal representation. But commonly feel the government is more responsive to wealthier interests. Several recent studies suggest that low-income citizens are better represented than one might think. The case for equal representation is based on empirical findings rather than theoretical reasoning. However, these studies begin from the basic theoretical premises. One is that re-election incentive ensures the elected government officials need to be responsive to public opinion, at least majority opinion. For example, median voter theories predict that candidates and political parties that politically feel centrist political values. Furthermore, one perspective in mass behavior research, sorry, this is going to take me a little bit. Hold on. Some argue that citizens are able to discern the policies advancing their own interests. Civil studies. Furthermore, some recent studies find that differences in policy opinions between income and other evidence that dynamic representation, the movement of government policy over time in response to public preferences occurs fairly equally for the rich, poor, middle government policy. Particular changes in government policy are responsive to changes in public opinion for all. Lots of changes. Finding that holds across multiple policy domains. These findings challenge the ideas about the pervasive impact of political inequality in the United States. However, it is striking. Most recent studies comparing citizen policy preferences to government policy outputs do not consider the role of interest groups. In this literature, there is some effort to maximize, if you examine the role groups, this critical omission for organized interests tend to play a starring role in theories of unequal representation. Okay, hold on. I'm looking.
Hey, take your time.
The policy priorities of organized interests, we first drew a random sample of registered lobbyists in Washington, assembling preferences based on the reports lobbyists. Thus, groups that reported lobbying on more issues had a greater chance of being selected. We scheduled an interview with the lobbyists each interview selected. As lobbyists to discuss the most recent issue they had to work on, each interview with a newly selected interest group generated one new issue for us to follow. We continued the sampling interviewing process. We generated 98 issues. It represented a sample from 1998 to 2002. Interviews with other lobbyists, other public sources, compiled additional lobbying activities on their this type of organization. The issue in our lobbying study tend to be rather low in media salience. More than 70% of the lobbying issues were never covered in a network television news say period. Half of the issues were covered in few. Only 4 of the issues were the subject of television advertising. Less. My lobbyists did receive some attention from government. More than 1/3 of the issues were the subject of congressional hearing, and all but 6 were featured. I wonder if these issues were counter to what the public would have wanted. I wonder if that's addressed in this paper.
So I have
What did
other examples, like I was saying previously, of the lawmakers seemingly to act against, well, um, well, acting in the favor of corporate interests, that in a way that might necessarily reflect the public's interest. So, can I keep going, or do you still need to?
Give me like 90
Go
seconds.
ahead,
Hold
please.
on. The Pew Research data probably doesn't go by voters, right? It probably is just national level polling.
I don't know.
Examine public opinion data from 2 other sources. These data from these services validate original findings. One of our data sources is Pew Research Centers, which include the MIP questions. Something policy in December 2020. Pew used the same question wording as Gallup, which also recorded. It might be likely voters, maybe. Broad policy priorities of public. They don't specify voters though, which I feel would be really important if they were actually going to do that.
Sorry.
But oh, sorry, I'm talking to myself. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Chinese. Lobbying agenda were healthcare, the environment, transportation, finance, defense, science. Now, most important issues for the public were crime, the economy, education, foreign affairs, healthcare, and social welfare. From 1999 to 2002, the domains that occupied the most space on the lobbying agenda were healthcare, the environment, transportation, finance, defense, and science and technology. While the most important issues for the public were crime, I don't know how private lobbyists could even lobby about crime.
I mean, in terms of private prisons, that's something you could.
Yeah, but like how many private prisons? What is the spending on like private prisons compared to like any other industry?
That's a separate issue. Sorry, but that's one way they could, or in terms of, I guess, law enforcement and providing resources for law enforcement, there could be a lot of things under quote unquote crime. So I don't know.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking of is that like if we look at like hold on, sorry. If we look at like the total revenues of these industries, I feel like how many like do private prisons really generate enough revenue for them to have a significant lobbying thing in Congress? Like I don't know if they generate enough money for that. That's
I
right.
think they do, but I'm not going to start making those claims. I don't know. But I believe they do have a lobbying.
Well, but I'm saying like, so when we compare it to like,
Mm.
so lobbyists spent the most money on healthcare.
Okay.
There's no way that they even touch that because that's huge, right? Environmental issues are going to be also huge. Transportation is fucking huge. The finance sector is huge. I don't think private prisons even touch any of this. So
So
that's not
what,
that doesn't.
what difference does that make if they don't compare in lobbying? Like, what difference does that actually make? They can't. That doesn't mean they
Well, I'm just
can't
looking in terms of
affect.
like, are we like, I'm just in terms of this paper, like, I'm trying to think of like, are the lobbyists here like
Hmm.
massively drawing away what the average citizen cares about? So when I say like the public cares about crime,
Hmm.
I don't think there's any place for like a lobbyist to come in and like influence like how like American opinion on crime or like I could say like private prison stuff, but the amount of donations that they make has got to be so low compared to
So
any other
it
industry.
doesn't have to be just through donations, right? So that's another problem with lobbying. So,
Well, sure, but donations are donations in kind. Like for all of these social issues, so like the economy, I don't even know how you would count like a lobbyist like caring about the economy. Education, I don't know how lobbyists spend on education.
so
Foreign affairs, does defense spending
So
count
in
as that?
terms of, and I don't know this, maybe you can answer this question for me. So in-kind donation, would that include writing legislation or giving proposed bills to policymakers? Would that be an in-kind donation? I don't know.
So an in-kind donation is basically if I'm providing some sort of service or something to you at no or discounted charge. So
Okay.
let's say, for instance, I was an expert software engineer and I
Mm-hmm.
charge $100 an hour for my services, and I decide to build your company an app, and it takes me 20 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making an in-kind donation
Yeah.
to you of like $20,000 or
Yeah.
$2,000. $100 an hour, 20 hours. You have $2,000.
Yeah.
That's like an in-kind donation. So I'm not directly donating you money, but I'm kind of like I'm providing some good or service to you on the side.
So
Um,
in the same case, like someone, a corporate lawyer who charges a certain amount of time for their money for their
yeah,
time.
basically.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
guess that
Okay.
be ideal.
So real quick, so it looks like the total revenue. So that's just money made. That's not profit. The total revenue of the corrections market of the private prison market is $7.4 billion per year. The revenue of ExxonMobil last year was $180 billion. That was like one
So
company. So it doesn't seem like private prisons make enough to like lobby. So I wouldn't
no,
expect them
no,
to.
no, no. That doesn't mean they're not lobbying. I mean that doesn't mean anything, right? So for instance, the numbers I quoted you before
Mhm.
from what the politicians got for campaign donations, right? That was 100,000, 120,000, 177,000, right? So
Mhm.
it takes very little. Our politicians are bought very cheaply. So they could have given similar amounts to politicians to push
Yeah, so but like that so this is a really big claim. It can't just be that they get money from a certain entity and then they happen to support policies that that entity is also pushing. We have to be able to demonstrate that like two things are happening. One is that a politician is supporting something that they otherwise wouldn't support, and two, that they're doing it against the will of their constituents in exchange for some
Okay, so
corporate lobbying.
you're conflating things, right? I'm answering just one question. At least
Mhm.
I'm trying to answer one question. Whether they could be lobbying, right? Could be affecting policy. So I'm saying this is something they could be doing in terms of influencing politicians, right? Like through campaign donations. But because I believe campaign donations do count as an influence. So I'm
Well,
saying
could
that
be, yeah, but I
despite
mean we
that,
could be anything.
I'm saying that despite the fact that ExxonMobil vastly outstrips it in terms of profit, right? And certainly probably in terms of lobbying, right? Almost certainly, right? In terms of lobbying, that actually doesn't matter, right? That a smaller corporate interests can still have an effect, right? And just because there are other interests, especially unrelated interests, right? It doesn't mean if Exxon is not probably not interested in whatever uh, uh, I don't know a private prison is doing. I was trying to think of a name, but I can't remember one. But like I think like CCA or something like that is one of those groups. So they're not actually interested. So their interests don't compete, right? So it doesn't matter that Exxon outspends it. That's irrelevant. And it doesn't matter that private prisons only make so much in revenue in comparison. That's irrelevant. Actual active lobbying is actually pretty cheap, and the on the other side, the benefits are wildly out of proportion, right? Again, as I said previously, for every dollar that a lobby group spends, they get $760 in return, and that was within that Huffington Post article. So I don't know why you're focusing on this. Is what I'm asking, and we can move on to
Yeah, so
something
this
else.
is like the central point of the issue. Like if the point is to just say like, "Oh, well, these guys spend money on politicians, politicians support what they support." Like that's not
So,
surprising, right?
okay. Once again, I said actually from the very beginning, less is that it's changing minds, right? But instead, it's putting their their policies and their priorities at the very top, right? So when politicians get these donations, right, it's not like one a politician's time is limited, right? So what they will use their legislative hours for matters, right? So if they're using their legislative hours on the priorities of those who are paying them, right, more so than the broader interests of the constituents, that would be a problem. That in itself would be a problem. So it doesn't even necessarily have to change that individual person's mind, right? So, but if they could be, if they're pushing those priorities instead of other priorities, right? That could be more important, possibly, right? That in itself is a problem. That is a corrupting influence of money in politics, right? So going back to that DEA thing, like Marsha Blackburn could be totally fucking in favor of that change of rules within the DEA, right? But the fact that she put that bill, or she helped co-sponsor support that bill, right, is in itself a problem. If otherwise, maybe other interests could have come to before, right? And
So
then she becomes a champion of that legislation to others.
sure, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing if her constituents would have supported it anyway, right? Like this isn't something that we
Okay,
should necessarily have a problem with unless she's doing this in contrast to what
exactly.
her constituents would want.
I agree.
So that's my so that's okay, so what I'm looking for are two things.
Hmm.
Is I'm trying to look at if a corporation donates money to a politician, does that meaningfully change their opinion on something? And two, if that does happen, are they doing it in a way that runs contrary to the interests of their constituents? These are the two important things that have to be
So
established,
it
right?
doesn't have to change their mind. So I contend it doesn't necessarily have to change their mind. That they could have actually have already done that. But I'm saying that within the legislative the amount of legislative time, the issues of the rich, right? They seem to get priority over issues of others. That's all. Not necessarily that they're changing individuals' minds. And okay, so there's multiple things here. So let me back up. Let me back up a bit here. Right. So part of the problem with money in politics is picking candidates. That in itself, right? So I was talking about public financing of elections, right? Because that would give everyone an equal opportunity to be involved. But without that system, without or some other system, so you could say that my system is a bad system. That's fine. I don't care, right? It's not important to me. Whatever solution is out there that would deaden the influence of corporate money in politics, I'll take that if that's more effective than what I suggested. I'm not specifically married to any individual solution. Okay. But part of the problem is simply picking candidates. Because under our current system, if you don't have enough money to run, right? Or if your opponent has some vastly more resources than you, right? Maybe through these campaign donations, right? That necessarily keeps candidates out of the marketplace of ideas,
Well, like, if it
out
like,
of the
it
race.
doesn't the whole,
So
like, 2020 season kind of, like, at least anecdotally for that one election cycle, doesn't that kinda not work? Because Steyer and Bloomberg were billionaires, and they
okay,
got blown the fuck out.
sure, great. So there's a difference between the federal and the state and the local levels, and I'm sure you can acknowledge this, right? On the federal level, right, when you're talking about presidency, that's a race in which there are a lot of bias, right? So it's a high visibility race, right? And
Mhm.
there's a lot of information out there on the candidates. So it's easier for individuals to make these decisions as to who they want to support, right? That's far easier on the federal level. As soon as you go to the state level, that decreases significantly, and then on the local level, it's a crapshoot. So I'm a person and who very much politically inclined. I keep track of these things all the time, but I don't know my local politics very well. If you ask me who
Yeah, but
is,
that has nothing to do with, like
no, it does. It has everything to do.
it doesn't though, right?
No, it does. So again, I'll keep going. In those low information races, right? The effects of money in terms of, like, for instance, ad revenue, Right? There's is a mountain of ads, and that's in a situation where people don't really know of the candidates or their policy positions very well. That could have a much greater effect on voters, right? So on the federal level, much harder because people understand what's going on. On the state and local level, much easier to affect that kind of change.
Well, if this was the case, then why wouldn't people just dump a ton of money into
They,
random elections and just start winning in local
they
elections all over the
do.
country?
They do. They do that.
Don't Democrat fuck, I have to look it up. Don't Democrats get like 2 times as much in donations as Republicans?
It doesn't matter to me if they do. I don't care if they do. I don't want anyone. I don't care if it's Democrats or Republicans. It's fine.
No, but I'm saying, like, if that was the case, then we would expect, like, Democrats to just be winning everywhere.
So it's
So Act Blue processed $1.5 billion in donations from July to September of
mhm.
last year. They crushed Republican fundraising. But it doesn't seem like that. I don't think that the idea of you pour a ton of money to a local election, all of a sudden people start caring because they hear advertisements about it. Like, it seems to like they're more galvanized by issues that come up publicly. So like Black Lives Matter related stuff, or Trump, Daddy Trump talking about certain things, or like the Iraq War, like these types of, well, I don't know if that would
I
mobilize
would
people.
say BLM. I would say Trump. Again, I would say those things are nationally
Mhm.
visible issues, right? Things on the local level, right? Like whether some real estate project should be zoned for a certain area, right? Like how many people have eyes on that, right? How many people know which politicians are actually supporting that? Who knows? I don't. If that was happening within my neighborhood, I don't know. I have no clue. And I think
But do you
that's
think
true
if
for many
do you
others.
listen to the radio? Like, how are you gonna hear advertisements related to this with, like, local spending? Like,
Of local spending. I mean, like in terms of television ad buys, or
do you watch TV? Like,
I don't, but lots of other people do. I'm a fucking yeah, I'm a millennial, but like other people, like boomers and stuff, and people within my generation, in which you've already um, illustrated in past conversations we've had, younger people don't vote as much, right? So older generations who are looking at old media are much more likely to encounter these things, right?
yeah, but it seems to me to be the case that, like, there are people that care a lot about local politics and there are people that don't. I don't think that just simply spending more money on a local issue is just gonna turn out more voters. That just doesn't seem to be the
It
case.
don't have to turn out more voters. It just alter the minds of voters who are actually going to turn out. So it doesn't have to increase turnout.
Hmm. I guess I would be curious to see if that was actually the case. But I haven't seen that. Like, because I feel like there have been some. Fuck, I should know these offhand, but I don't. I feel like there have been a couple of cases of really big spenders in local like electorates that just get fucking crushed. And
So
every
one
time it
example
happens,
for
people get
you.
really ass mad about it because they're like, "Why the fuck did we send so much money to this person? They got
So
destroyed. Why did we
okay,
do that?"
okay. So here's an example for you. Okay, that would be in Seattle. I want to say.
Uh-huh.
Shawama something. She has an Indian sounding name. I'm gonna fuck it up,
Okay.
so I'm not even bother. She was a socialist,
Hmm.
and she I think basically like was it Amazon and Microsoft, basically big tech companies hated her and put a ton of money in a race, and she still won. So that was an example where she triumphed over money in politics. That's not always the case, right? Because the fact that I
Well,
even
and apparently Amy McGrath tried to run against McConnell, and she apparently raised a fuck ton of money for that election. And I guess I'm trying to find the numbers. She still got absolutely fucking destroyed.
yeah, and again, with what these two things have in common, right? The fact that you and I know about these things, that we can call them out of memory, says that they were, well, at least for me anyway. I won't speak for you. For me, it says that they are nationally visible political events, right? So
Yeah,
there's
but
a
we don't
lot of
care if they're nationally visible to people that are highly informed in politics. What we want them to be is more visible to people that aren't necessarily high information voters, right? Like, that's the whole point of this. The fact that you and I know about it is we do politics online all the time. The question is whether or not this types of advertising like mobilizes people that otherwise wouldn't be caring about these issues, right? Or changes the minds of local voters.
So I'm saying that there's more likelihood that because these things are nationally visible, that other voters who aren't us, right, will have seen this as well. That they are more aware of that. There's more mobilization. That that woman from Seattle could have, for instance, raised money in response to the mountain of money that was coming her way, right? So like I saw her, that the woman I'm thinking of, and again I apologize. because I don't know exactly her name and I'm going to mispronounce it. But I saw her, and like if she was raising money at that point in time, then she had a national stage to do so, right? She was on progressive talk shows, and they raised the issue, they brought it up multiple times, so she had a platform to respond. Amy McGrath had a platform to respond. The guy and who challenged what's his face from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. And there was the African American who
Yeah,
challenged
because
him.
there's
I
like
mean,
so many examples of this apparently.
yeah.
So Joe Donnelly got crushed by AOC. Jamie Harrison raised over $100 million, got crushed by Lindsey Graham.
And I'm saying
Like,
all of those have something in common, that the high visibility, right? And so
yeah,
that
but
allows them
what
to
I'm saying is that it
respond.
seems like all
So in
that
terms
ad
of
spending on the high visibility didn't really do much for him at the end of the day. It doesn't seem like
so
just spending money wins you
so
elections.
so not only, yes, again, once again, high visibility. So it's all the cases that aren't making the news. Those are the ones that are more problematic. Um, so AOC is able to not only raise money, right, but she's also able to organize, right? She's able to get people behind her because
Hmm.
people know that this is happening, right? Like TYT, for instance,
Hmm.
was very much
So,
behind
but
it.
these are also like forms of donations, right? These are in-kind
In
donations,
kind,
really, when you volunteer.
which I'm all for. That's fine. In kind donations are okay. So I haven't pushed against that. So
Wait, hold on. I'm just trying to keep track. So you're 100% okay with people organizing volunteers and doing phone banking and
yeah,
door knocking and all of that. You're
yeah.
okay with that. Are you okay with people raising money to do that?
Raising money to do. Oh, I see. Like separately from the campaigns.
Mhm.
I'd have to think about that, but
Okay,
it's
because what you're
probably
essentially
fine.
talking about there, because now you think you have to think about that. That's basically a super PAC, is what you're talking about.
So, I,
Like an independent entity that can raise an infinite amount of money to like advocate on behalf of some particular issue is basically a super PAC.
yeah. So, like I said, I wasn't. So, stopping all. So, I said direct donations. So, when I said previously, direct donations to campaigns should be ended.
Sure,
So,
but
I
it's
said
really
that.
boring to say
But
like, well, we should stop all
beyond.
direct donations, but we can still do everything in kind. Because I mean, now we can basically run a campaign by proxy if we want to do that, right? Like we can just do everything that we would have raised money for directly, just indirectly. So you have all the same problems now. Instead of campaigns raising a fuck ton of money on their own, well, now they just have a side group and they raise all the money and then campaign for them.
Okay. Well, then, if you feel that's the case, then we can limit those two. Like in terms of the amount of spending. So, like I said, I'm not married to any specific policy.
Yeah, but now the only thing, and we might just disagree on this. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah, it's
My
fine.
only issue there is that at that point, we've basically said like you have no freedom of speech. You're not allowed to organize or volunteer on behalf of like a particular candidate because it's basically an in-kind donation, and your ability to do this is really curbed.
So no,
It's
no,
just
no,
you
no.
have to have like
So you
state-funded
specifically asked
elections.
about raising money for those in-kind donations, right? And I'm saying like I haven't put thought into exactly that specific issue. So
Mhm.
maybe I'd want to ban them, maybe not. I don't know. And again, I'm not here to design the entire policy around this, right? Simply making the case that money is a corrupting influence in politics. That's the case that I'm trying to make here.
Yeah,
It
but
might
I still think that has
it
yet to
might
be
be
demonstrated because it feels like we can find so many cases
okay.
where it seems to be a little bit more complicated than that. Like if
It
money
is
was a
more
corrupting
complicated.
influence, yeah, but it just seems like it's not like a good measure. Like if you just spend
Okay.
more money, you're not guaranteed to beat anybody. You're not even guaranteed to come close to beating somebody. There are so many other issues at play, and we can't prove that like money is changing, like is corrupting a particular senator or lawmaker's opinion on something in a way that it wouldn't have been otherwise, in a way that's contrary to the constituents. Because these are the two things. These are really the two important things that need to be proved to
Mm.
say that money is a corrupting influence of politics.
So
Because if people are just paying money for politicians they already support, or paying money to show politicians ideas of things that their constituents would support, I imagine both of us would agree that that's a good thing. That's fine. We want that to happen.
yeah. So in terms of supporting politicians, oh fuck, I already did it. You get it. Sorry. In terms of supporting politicians who they are already agree with them, that's fine. Okay. So like if a politician would not have otherwise, for instance, put forth the bill, right? That's for, let's say, the banking industry, right? Put forth the bill for the banking industry within the legislative hours that they have available. So let's say they have 100 legislative hours available, and they've dedicated, because of that, those donations, dedicated 20 hours um, to to this bill, right? To making this happen, right? And then if that not had not been the case, if they had not got those donations, right? That they might have spent their time on something else, that in itself is a corrupting influence of money in politics. Right?
I guess I just disagree. Like,
Okay.
if you have two issues and you believe that either of those issues are important to your constituents, but somebody's offering you money to take a look at, or will help fundraise for you to look at one issue, then I mean, you probably should look at that other issue. Like, why, if it's equal on both sides, why would you choose one over the other? Like, you're going to do whatever secures you the re-election. And if you're still being voted on by your constituents and they like you, though, you probably should secure
So
that money.
are are your constituents aware of what you're doing? Right? Are the constituents aware of what you are of who is lobbying an individual politician, right? And
I
what
mean, it's all
exact
public. I mean, you're talking to me about it right now. So yeah, I mean, we can look up what bills they support. That's public information. We can look up who directly donates to somebody. That's public
I would
information as
say
well.
you and I are directly we one we have a financial
Hmm.
reason why to do this, right? To provide the content for our audience, right? So we have a reason to
Hmm.
be doing this one way or the other. And we have an interest. You and I have an interest to do this, but I think
Hmm.
most people don't have an interest, and they don't have an eye on these things. And it's within that space, right? That all kinds of actions that might not be beneficial for the public good to take place, right? And then from there, for voters to not actually respond in ways that you would think they would respond if there was legislation being passed that they disagreed with, that harmed them, right? And for instance, so sure, you could say money in politics doesn't um, necessarily affect um, isn't necessarily the only thing that affects all these outcomes, and I would agree with you. Um,
Hmm.
Voters act, for instance, for many reasons. Like there are voters who just vote on single issues, right? Guns or abortions, famous ones. Okay?
Hmm.
So they're not unconcerned with everything else, right? Tell me where you stand on guns, where you stand on abortions, and then I will vote for you or against. Um,
Okay.
and then they're in terms of how they feel in terms of the economy, right? Like these things also affect how a voter react, right? There's a litany of issues that will affect them, right? I say one
Hmm.
of those issues, one of those things um, uh, is that corporate money in terms of like ad buys, in terms of putting candidates in front of them, right, rather than other candidates who don't get airtime because all the airtime is taken up. In terms of uh, uh, being able to mobilize other resources, basically like like campaign signs or whatever signage, all those things. There's a whole many things that can affect. I'm saying money in politics is a corrupting influence, not the corrupting influence. So,
Money. I mean, like,
and
I
one
guess I can imagine it being a corrupting influence, but I feel like it can do good or it can do bad,
it
and
can.
I haven't. Yeah,
So
so I wouldn't want to ban it altogether because I don't feel like I don't feel like it's been adequately demonstrated that, like, oh yeah, like, here is these politicians that would have won but they didn't because they were outspent, or
so
here is this legislation that would have never passed but somehow lobbyists got it through
okay,
even though all the voters hated it. Like,
sure.
it
So
seems like lobbyists tend to operate
let's
at the
try another
fringes more.
one. Let's try another one. So well,
Okay.
there's two that I'll present to you. Right. One is the case of Tesla and the electric car manufacturers. So Tesla has been working to sell cars directly to consumers. They've been
Hmm.
trying to do this for a long time. I'm sure you're aware of this.
Okay.
However, the car dealership system has been blocking this, right? They've been using their lobbying power, their corporate influence, to block this, and they've been doing this in state legislators across the country. In
Hmm.
particular, I know of two: Connecticut and Georgia. I think New Jersey as well, but I couldn't get updated information on that one. I have so don't worry, I can send you articles on these. Um, so let me put this. Oh, actually, I'll put this one. So I'll put this all in VC chat. One second. Again, if you're watching at home or wherever, then you can follow along. Go to my Discord server, go to my channel, and then join my Discord server. And
Hmm.
you will find these articles within my Discord server under VC chat, And these are all the articles I'm placing. Okay. So I one the American Progress one. It mentions the New Jersey issue, but that's an old article. The two articles I place after that are the Georgia example and the Connecticut example, which simply shows that there's been a massive lobbying effort and one that's been successful largely to keep Tesla out of these markets, right? So in Georgia, apparently, Tesla did pass a limited form in which they could sell directly. I believe it's 5 locations in that particular example. But still, they have not been able to get all what they want and just full access to be selling these things.
Sure. But so my question
And
is like, is this something that voters like massively like are on the other side of? That's the question.
exactly, right? So, is this something that has a lot of attention? So, I think it does have a certain amount of attention that Tesla wants to be doing this, right? Now, is it at the top of any voter's agenda? Absolutely not. Never. Will never be the case, right? And so, our voters are mobilized against
Well, but
this one way.
couldn't we look on the flip side? Couldn't we conceive of a world where it's more likely that voters would massively be opposed to this?
We could conceive in the world, but do we live in that world? I don't, I don't know. And I would
So
say
what do
that,
you
like,
think there's more of in a particular state? Do you think that there are more families and friends and members of car dealerships that work those jobs, that provide jobs to those types of families and people? Or do you think there are more people that want to buy Teslas directly from an auto manufacturer?
I'm saying that now if it's the case that there are advantages of buying directly, there are like for instance maybe a lower price, so you don't have to go through the dealership
I don't
system.
disagree with you, but I'm asking, who do you think there are more of in like Michigan? Do you think there are more people buying Teslas, or do you think there are more
I'm saying,
people
well, first
that
of all,
are
it's
being
not.
supported by people that work at car
So one,
dealerships?
it's not just Tesla. This is just all electric car manufacturers or others.
Okay, so I'd have to
Okay.
look at some of the others,
So
but the
like,
problem with a lot of this legislation is that, like, in some of it, it was just Tesla, and that's why a lot of this. That's why some of the legislation died.
mm,
Fuck, I was looking at, I think one of the articles. I think it was in, it was either in Illinois or Michigan, where there were complaints from other auto dealers. They're like, "Hold on, wait, you can't just exempt Tesla from this. This is bullshit. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to do it with everybody."
mm,
And the legislation died in the Republican House in that
mm,
state.
mm. Okay, sure.
So,
So.
so yeah, so I'm just because
Mm,
like again, and this is kind of my problem with a lot of, I don't want to
okay.
say progressives or very left leaning people. It's like people will say like, well, there's no possible way that voters could be in favor of this. But I think in some cases, I think if you look at it, it's like, yeah, I can imagine. Now, personally, I think it'd be cool to buy directly from a
Mm,
manufacturer, but I'm sure there are probably a lot of people that work at car dealerships and stuff who don't want to lose their jobs, and people that are related to them or know those people or have car dealerships that are part of their town or part of their town's economies who want to keep those dealerships there. And if you make it legal for manufacturers to sell directly to the customer, then a lot of those dealerships are probably threatened, right?
okay, so maybe they're a friend or maybe not. So when in Georgia, when the so that legislation, I believe it was the Georgia example where that happened, where
Mhm.
they were able to spend buy cars through like those 5 locations, right? Still, electric car sales within the dealership system, because they were still selling cars within the dealership system, rose, right? So it wasn't like a massive threat to those jobs, right?
Sure, but I
Simply,
imagine people would probably expect it to become a massive threat. Like it's possible that electric car sales is
maybe,
rising so much, but if you were to make it legal for every auto manufacturer to directly sell to consumers,
maybe
you'd probably save a fuck ton of money by not buying from a
my
dealership.
my point is that the priorities of those car dealers, right, become the priorities of the lawmakers because of the money that they spend. So
Well, and
the
because
auto
but that
dealers
money
and
also translates to
lobby,
popular support.
the auto dealers and lobby and individual car dealers have contributed more than 1.2 million to state races. I believe this is the Georgia example. In the past decade, the association also spends
Okay, what you just said was like no money at all. 1.2 million to state
oh,
races over a decade?
within. Sorry, hold on. Again, once again, our
So that's
politicians,
120,000 a year to state races?
once again, our politicians are bought cheaply, right? Especially when you go to the state and local levels, right?
How much is
There's
being
less
spent on
money
these
involved.
elections though?
No, hold on. So, like the fact that I would, if you want to corrupt me, you'd have to spend a lot fucking more money, right? Is irrelevant to this conversation, right? So, like the
No, no,
fact.
no, no. What's relevant is that like if there, let's say that all of these elections, let's say in the past decade, let's say that like $500 million has been spent across all of these elections, and they've donated over a decade
Mhm,
$1.2 million, and
mhm.
I doubt that that's like a huge corrupting influence. I'd be
Oh,
surprised if
hold on,
that's
no. So you're just you say you doubt it is, but how do we know? So like,
well, that's my, but that's on
what
you
we
to
do
prove. How
know,
do you
so
know,
what
right?
we do know is that these priorities have been put forward. That these bills keep getting strike down. That the electric car companies feel pessimistic that they'll get what they're looking for, right? That this lobby is so strong that it's keeping their legislative priorities from actually
Yeah, but
taking
that's what
hold.
I want proof
So,
of. So, like, here are things that I
so
would be interested in, right? Like, are other politicians rising up with similar platforms,
mm,
but then challenging them and saying, like, hey, you know what? You're going to be able to buy directly from a dealership. Fuck this guy. And either forcing the politicians in there to change their opinion or unseating them from office because they're obviously doing things that their constituents don't like. Or are we seeing like other types of like pushback from voters in these states? It doesn't seem like that's the
so,
case. So
so
it seems like they're
again,
not actually like
So
in favor of what you're
again,
pushing.
well, I'll say it one more time. Oftentimes, the issues that lobbying is most effective on are ones that don't have the most voter salience. That doesn't mean, or at least like salience of voters. That doesn't mean that there isn't damage being done, right? Or at the
Sure,
very
but
at the
what you've
least,
done is
or
you
at the
you
very least, or at the
yeah,
very sorry.
I understand what you're saying, but you've constructed an unbeatable argument. Like you
Thank you.
literally can well, it's not thank you, it's because your
Yeah,
argument
yeah,
is absurd.
yeah.
You're saying that in shadowy places,
Mhm.
it might be the case on issues that we have no data about, that voters don't know about, and on issues that we don't know the outcomes of, that some politicians might be changing their opinions on these things in ways that in the future might be detrimental to vote. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to argue against that. Like you have zero evidence for this. You can weave to me a story, but you have no evidence whatsoever. And I can't push back against you because I don't even know what I'm
So
arguing
we know
against. Like
what's
you're essentially
happening.
saying, well, here, just to be clear,
Okay.
you're saying that these people are donating money to
Mm,
politicians
mm.
and that the politicians like may or may not be changing their opinions based on those donations in ways that may or may not be representing their constituents because we don't have voter data on it, in ways that may or may not ultimately hurt them because we don't know how it's going to turn in the future. I have no idea how I'm supposed to argue against that point.
So I'd say that um, so within we know what's happening within our reality, right? Our reality is that these legislative priorities are the ones being pushed. That these legislative hours are the ones are being chosen for for these constituents being the business interest, right? So I'm saying that that the problem is that we cannot know, you and I, we can't know the effects, the full effects, right? Like the direct connections between these individuals. So like, we can't know these things, right? But we can imagine, right? We can imagine that within a system where money is being injected, right? And these things are beneficial to politicians, right? Like getting that money is beneficial to a politician, right? Continuing getting that money is beneficial to a politician, and legislative outcomes, right, that are favorable to these corporations, right, are beneficial, right? Like to skew these legislative outcomes. If we see a pattern, right, in which corporations continue to get these outcomes, these beneficial outcomes, right, then we can see a corrupting influence, right? We can see now. Each individual act, right? Which each individual act, like you have to judge on their own as to whether they are uh, necessarily detrimental to the public good, right? So some of them certainly might be fine. Some of them might be neutral, okay. But my problem is that that we have this influence at all, that it affects
But we've already
politicians that
said
either
you've already
don't.
said that this influence might be good or might be bad. So
Yeah, I
why would
agree.
you want to get rid of it if we have no idea if any of it is corrupting or bad at
No,
all?
so well, first of all, I do believe it's corrupting. I believe so. Okay, so I believe that these outcomes. So the fact that again, going back to that statistic, that 4.4. Let me go back to it. Corporations get 4.4 trillion in federal contracts and subsidies. For every dollar spent in influence politics, the nation's most politically active corporations receive $760 from the government. Right.
Yeah, but that
That.
calculation is ridiculous,
Mm,
right? This is just a total calculation of lobbying to government spending.
hmm.
Like lobbying can go down to zero and the government is still going to have like military contractors or hire out stuff from government spending. Like that's
Sure,
like the
but
women make less than men and they just look at the aggregate of everything. It's like, oh, it's all sexism, 22% difference. But it's more complicated than that, right? I don't think you can just look at the total amount spent on lobbying, the total amount spent by the federal government and say, well, $1 of lobbying gets you this amount from the government. I think it's a really naive
once
calculation.
again, yes, these things are complicated. However, if corporations, so okay, let's try it from a different direction. Do you think corporations would make these investments if they weren't seeing a positive return?
Would they make these investments if they were? I'm sure that they see some kind of positive return, sure. But
Some
I
kind
don't
of
care if
positive.
corporations see a positive return. What I
So
care about is if they see a positive return that's in contrary interest to what the constituents would want.
sure, sure, sure. Okay, so we can acknowledge that they well are seeing not some kind of they're seeing a tremendous amount of positive return. I would argue, right?
Well, you would argue with no evidence, but go ahead.
No, well, first of all, I actually have provided you evidence in terms of the amount of money, in terms of legislative outcomes that are going in their
Well,
direction,
you're
and
just
with
showing
the
me
other.
aggregate spending of lobbyists and
So that
aggregate
was one
spending of
example, but
government.
then
Like,
there's all the other examples I've shown you in terms of policy outcomes in
yeah,
which.
but on all of those policy outcomes examples, not for a single one, you haven't been able to demonstrate that that ran contrary to public interest, which is what I'm looking for.
Okay,
This was the thing that I looked for that totally turned me off from this whole argument.
okay,
To say
great.
this all the time that corporate lobbying was bad, but then the question somebody presented this to me in the debate. They're like, "Can you give me a single example of some major piece of legislation or something that like passed that the public was all against, but corporations like lobbied against it?" And I was like, "Oh fuck, I actually can't think of any of these examples."
All
There
right.
are like a few on the fringe examples where like this particular line was probably not good, or this like agency did this one thing. We're sure, yeah, okay, this is a bad point of like corporate lobbying that probably
Hmm.
people should have looked deeper into. But in terms of this being like a huge problem in our system, I think it's just widely overblown.
Okay. Let's try another example. All right.
Okay.
All right. So, Disney. This is a pretty well-known example in terms of copyright, right?
Hmm.
Disney has changed copyright law continuously, right, to
Hmm.
extend their hold over, for instance, Mickey Mouse. So Mickey Mouse should have been in the public domain long ago. In fact, I believe in 1984 it would be the year that that should have happened. All right. So, um, however, originally when copyright law was written, it was 14 years. Oh, sorry. Let me put my sources in the chat. Here. I'm gonna have a whole list of them. Second, it's one. That's weird. Okay. That's two. All right, another one. That's three. So those are my right there. Um, so it was really at 14 years, and then extended to 100 years. Uh, not all of them were extended by Disney, but in 1928, Disney released the first Mickey Mouse cartoon. By 1984, Mickey would be in public domain due to 56 years of protection afforded by the law at that time. Disney lobbied Congress, and in 1976, corporate copyright protections were extended to 75 years, meaning Mickey would be in public domain by 2003. But in 1988, Congress passed the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act, which was nicknamed the Mickey Mouse Protection Act. It passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, with no public debate and no fanfare. Thus, Mickey's protection was once again extended, this time giving the company complete ownership for another 20 years until 2023. The company
Yeah, but
launched.
again, like, do voters care about this? Is this something that,
Hold on,
like, is
hold on,
contrary to
hold on,
voters?
hold on. I'm sorry. Got you. The company launched the Disney Political Action Committee and spent a total of 149,612 contributing to campaigns of politicians who would later vote in the bill. Records show that 19 of the 25 sponsors of the bill received money directly from the Disney CEO, Michael Eisner. Now, on the other side, the
Okay.
Copyright Office wrote a report on how this damages archival efforts. Orphan works, which are media in which locating all the relevant copyright holders is extremely difficult or impossible. So there's mountains of these things, right? Where like individual works of art or media, you can't locate a specific copyright holder or all the relevant parties. Maybe one or two, or maybe holders are dead, long dead, right? And so you can't find out a copyright holder. And so that means that good faith individuals who are trying to preserve these works of art, right, or whatever, cannot actually digitally preserve these works without risking action from copyright holders. So it may not be the case that these things are either within the public domain, don't know, or the copyright holders don't care about these things, they don't care about the specific arts, right? And so they find out that action has been taken on this media without their permission. They have remedies, right, in terms of lawsuits that they can levy, right? It specifically names, and that's the support, specifically names the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act of 2008 as a reason why these works can't be preserved. So what we have is a mountain of film and photos specifically. Photos is what they focused on in that report, but film and photos that are counted as orphan works. They are rotting. Like film is actually literally rotting in
Okay,
warehouses.
okay, you're talking a ton. I'm gonna ask again. Who cares? Does any
Sorry,
voter actually
there's
care
no
about this?
hold on, no one cares. In fact, the copyright.
If no one cares, then I wouldn't expect.
So the report that I gave you in terms of the Copyright Office actually does say constituents care, right? It says that the Copyright Office it gets uh, notices and questions from specific individuals who are trying to preserve these works,
That
right?
doesn't tell me anything about what the average voter cares about. That whether or not
So,
specific
so I'm
individuals
talking
send a
about.
letter to the Copyright Office.
So
Like,
once again, the public this may not be a issue like that is most salient to the public. That doesn't mean like damage isn't being done, right? So are you saying
we're
that
not talking about damage. We don't care.
hold on. How, of course we're talking about damage. How are we not
No,
talking
we're
about
not.
damage?
We don't care about damage. We care about
I
what the voters want. That's
no
what
no
we're
no.
looking at.
So okay, the voters. So are you saying you believe that the voters don't care if cultural artifacts are lost, right? Or cultural artifacts that could otherwise be saved have been lost.
Are you implying that the average American gives a fuck about whether or not something is archived in some hall of
I'm not
Congress?
saying
I'm
the
gonna,
average
of
American.
course,
I'm
I'm gonna
saying there's a
answer. Of course,
constituency.
I'm gonna answer that the public doesn't.
I'm saying that there's a
care about this.
constituency. I'm saying there's a constituency. Does the average American, right, spend all their time thinking about gun violence? No, right? They don't spend all the time thinking about this. They have other priorities on their minds, right? Like there's a small constituency, like for instance the gun lobby, right, that deeply cares about these things, and so they lobby, they lobby their congressional individuals.
Sure. Here's a good question. Do you have any proof whatsoever that the average American thinks that Disney is in the wrong here?
So hold on, no, I'm not looking for the average American. Once again, I'm saying like I'm talking about I'm pointing out there's a constituency here that is trying to save these bills and save these pieces of media and not actually being serviced by their policymakers. In fact,
Because
the
it sounds like they're a
policymakers are
minor.
responding. Sorry.
It sounds like they're a minority. We don't care about minority constituents. We care about the majority
So
voting
is
constituents.
is Disney a majority constituent, right? Like they're not, right? So like we can understand that the corporate stakeholders within Disney are not a majority interest within the country either, right? Does so on the other side, does the majority of the country care that Mickey Mouse is the sole property, sole domain of Disney?
It seems like voters just don't care one way or another that much.
I'm saying that there is a constituency here, and in fact, there's proof of this, right? Like from the Copyright Office, that's
not proof. Getting a few letters in the Copyright Office is not proof that most Americans support a particular
I'm not saying.
thing.
I didn't say. Well, you keep putting words in my mouth. I didn't say most. I didn't say most, right? I'm saying.
Okay, but we
that,
don't care. But wait, why do you care if a few Americans
saying,
support them? In that case, why should the people that write into the office? Why should their concerns matter more than everybody that has a stake in Disney? Why should their concerns matter more?
I'm contending that there is. Well, one thing I say that like to answer your question more directly is that they don't have equal standing to get their priorities listened to by Congress, right? The fact that Disney can use their corporate lobbying influence to get what they want. Clearly, they've actually already accomplished this multiple times.
You said that they donated what, like $130,000 across.
You keep focused on this amount of money. Like it's not my fault that our politicians are cheap whores. That's not my.
If the politicians are cheap whores, then we should be able to buy them. We should be able to fundraise.
But we don't. Money. In fact, we see that across the board. That once again, and we have the other statistics saying that for every $1 spent by unions and public interest groups on direct lobbying that year, business interests spent $34. So
that's not surprising if businesses represent 34 times the revenue, though.
Exactly.
Of course they're going to.
Of course, because they have more money. So we should limit that
but then
money.
We want to see, but we haven't demonstrated that any of this is bad or that any of this is contrary to public opinion. That like these are the important things to demonstrate. We haven't demonstrated any of these.
Okay, so my problem, right? So I guess I should have done a better job of this. But like my problem is that like the fact that there is not a level playing field, right? So you keep saying that like, oh, we have to say that this is a net negative, right? So I think these things are a net negative. So I believe that's the case. But you and I disagree on that. And that's okay, right? But I'm saying that within our politics, within our political structure, that these oil corporations have outsized voice. That's the big problem. Is there outsized voice within our political system, right? So instead, if there was a more even playing field, right, where individuals could put their policy in front of our policymakers, right, in front of our lawmakers, and have equal attention, right? And let's say policymakers decide on Disney, right? Well, I think Disney should have Mickey Mouse in perpetuity, and as a result of that, these films rot, right? Oh, that could be the case. There's a world that could happen, certainly. But we're not in that world where there's simply a balance, right? That perfect balance between public and private interests, right? So there's a private interest that's simply getting more attention. Something I've kept saying this entire time, simply getting more attention than any other public interest, right? Non-moneyed interests. And that in itself is the corrupting influence. So whether each individual outcome is good or bad is not of my concern, right? So like it's that there's not an equal standing for these things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can acknowledge that it might be the case that people with more money can get time in front of Congress in a way that somebody without money can't. I can acknowledge that might be the case, but I mean, like, people can fundraise for ideas if they're really popular as well. So, for instance, people like Bernie Sanders that otherwise don't have the money to run, or that otherwise would get completely ignored in your system because he wouldn't be allowed to raise money. Or there might be people that have like different individual pet issues. There might be environmental issues.
Mm.
They might have to do with aid to Africa, whatever. That these people also wouldn't be allowed to raise money. I guess like I think it is possible that there might be some people with some disproportionate representation in front of Congress because they have the ability to spend money and go there. But if we can't prove that they're like influencing Congress in a way where they're passing legislation that goes against public interest or against what their constituents would want, or that they're doing things that the politicians themselves wouldn't already do, I just it feels all moot to me. Like it's just not an issue I care about. I guess like maybe in a perfect ideal world, once we've solved like 50 other issues related to voting stuff in the United States, maybe this is something I'd take a look at. But I think returning to my central argument at the very beginning, I just don't think it's anywhere near as big a deal as anybody makes it out to be. And when the argument ultimately boils down to some companies in back rooms with amounts of money that we might not 100% know about might be influencing some politicians on some issues that we don't have good voter data about because voters don't know about it in ways that might in the future harm voters. This is just such an issue that is so like ripe for conspiracy and not relevant, I think, to the average political discourse.
So it's not important to you. I want to.
It shouldn't be important to anybody. I think
So
there are
it's
so
not.
many more important
So
issues.
okay, great. But it's not important to you that money in politics, the flood of money in politics, means that it crowds some individuals out of running at all. That's not important to you. So I want to understand for myself and the audience to understand what's important to you. So it's not important to you that that's simply the case that me, Joe Schmo, who wants to jump into a race, knows that there is a politician backed by heavy corporate influence, influences that I don't support, right, and which will never support me. That that there's no way that I can compete with them in terms of our current fundraising system, in terms of our direct fundraising. That there's no way I can do that, and so I never even bother. Maybe something would have happened. Maybe there could have been some sort of miracle, right? And I could have uncovered some sort of scandal that that corrupt politician A is involved in, right? But I don't even bother. I don't even bother, right? Because I
Well, I
know
mean, like, so what? So I guess what's the alternative? Literally, every single person should be allowed to run if they can get 100 signatures. So now everybody's crowded out and nobody has a chance. Like,
is every single person. First of all, I'm not sure that it's actually a problem that 100 people would run, but more democracy is not a problem. Like less democracy is a problem.
well,
So
that's not true at all. More democracy could absolutely be a problem. If
okay,
there's 50 people running on a particular ballot, or let's say, for instance, you've got a strong Republican and two Democrats running on the same ballot, you could split the vote and fuck yourself. We can think of plenty of times where, because of our voting system, for instance, first past the post, that quote unquote more democracy could be a problem. Yeah,
okay,
sure.
so once again, I would say that having more people being able to participate, right, and figuring out the rules of that participation is a separate matter, right? But simply having them be able to participate and not be immediately crowded out by money is a problem, and that in itself picks helps. That's a separate. There's a money primary that happens before even the regular primary, right? Like simply being able to raise enough money to compete. So, are you saying that that is not of interest to you? You don't care?
I think it'd be cool to have like some sort of public fund available for some people,
Okay,
but I don't
great,
think it's a big issue, no.
great. So we're
Because I think
finding
we've
common
seen
ground.
demonstrated over and over again times where relatively poor people have gotten backing from other groups like AOC and have become wildly popular politicians, or
Yeah,
times where people have spent a fuck ton of money and gotten absolutely crushed, like the half dozen examples we brought up earlier.
yeah, exactly. But those are national examples that are all are very well known. So it's not, again, I've already said that, like,
And I'm sure there
because
are
that
local examples too. I
visibility
can't.
visibility brings some sort of protection. I mean, that helps insulate people from the effects of corporate money. That in itself is a counterbalance, is having that visibility, having that transparency. So, but you don't think that's a huge problem? Okay, all right.
I don't.
Um,
No, not compared to other problems. No, I don't think that's a huge problem. No.
okay. So there was one article that I put into chat um, that says that.
Wait.
Sorry, take your time.
Go over this article. Hold on. I'll be back 1 second.
Take
Two
your time.
seconds. Hold on.
Hmm? If you would give us a moment, audience, we're waiting for Destiny to get back. So please give us a moment. Thank you very much. Hope you all having a good time waiting for Destiny.
Okay, I'm here. Okay, hit me up. What
Oh,
do you got?
sorry. You're reading something?
Oh no, I said I'm back. I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I thought. Okay, I apologize. So, do you not care that the preferences of average citizens tend to be out tend to be ignored by politicians in favor of those of the elite? That's not a concern for you?
Average citizens representation is not supposed to matter. What's supposed to matter is the average voter representation.
No, average voter representation as well. Sure, average voter
I
representation.
don't know if that's the case,
Okay.
because in all the responses that I saw to the there's a big Gillens and Page study about whether or not political elites were represented more. It seemed like it was a toss-up. It seemed like the representation was like fairly what we would expect it to be. For the response studies to that,
Okay.
yeah.
So here's another study. I put it again in VC chat. I'm saying that politicians listen to rich people, not
Yeah,
you.
so this Vox article that you're citing right
Mhm,
here
mhm.
explicitly deals with that Gillen study, and there's literally a follow-up Vox article that says that there's been a lot of criticism of that study.
Yeah.
So
So median income
there's this like wait, hold
voters.
on. Wait, before you start citing all this. So
Sure, sure.
here's another Vox article that literally talks about this exact study that says, remember that study saying
Mhm.
America is an oligarchy? 3 rebuttals say it's wrong. So
Okay.
this study's been contradicted quite a bit at this
So
point.
okay. So I would say that, and in terms of all the other articles that um, I've cited, right? Um,
None of which have demonstrated any of the points you're trying to make, but
Okay,
yeah.
I disagree, but sure. Um, I would say that, in all the other articles that I've cited, that they say that there was a lot of disagreement, one way or the other, as to the exact amount of influence, right? But we say, um, but it's stated that there is quite a bit of evidence to say there is some influence. There is some influence in terms of these politicians. So these in their policy outcomes. So the fact that there are differing opinions on this is not a surprise to me. Like, I already know this, um, but this is yet another example that this money skews the.
Well, this isn't another example because the study's been debunked, and
Has
Vox
it been
itself goes.
fully? All right, so I'd have to read this other article you're saying, but if whether it's been fully debunked, I have to read that as well. So.
Okay.
Um, but the fact that the scholarship is not all in consensus on this is not surprising. I never said that it was. Um, yeah. So okay, so you don't. So that's not an points of view. Okay. So do you
Do
think?
you and it's not of importance to you that you'd be effectively banning all forms of lobbying done by outside corporations that would raise money that might represent certain interest groups. So you'd be okay with banning all pro-abortion people, like the ACLU, any like Greenpeace or climate change people. Like you would ban all of these
Mm,
people from raising money and lobbying politicians to support their causes as well. Anybody that, like the EFF, anything related to net neutrality, like all of that, you just want none of that lobbying allowed either.
so lobbying, so they can. So I'm talking about direct contributions. So like lobbyists can raise money for their own operations, if that's what you're talking about, right? So raise money to do the lobbying, right? Corporations, of course, have that money. They don't have to raise it specifically for their interests. So that would be like.
If a lobby supports somebody, they're necessarily going to get more campaign contributions, right? Or are we just
I mean,
ignoring that? So
but if we're banning campaign contributions, for instance, and I'm not concerned about that then. Um, and on the other hand, I'm not banning
right, but it's
lobbying
like the same
altogether.
problem.
So I'm not banning lobbying altogether, right? So I'm saying, so I agree with you at the very start of this, that lobbying has a lot of beneficial effects, right? So in terms of providing some expertise in an area that a lobbyist, excuse me, a politician does not have, right? So that I would like to keep. That's actually helps our democracy, right? And you can have these outside groups with policy goals that I completely agree with, can also interject, right?
Okay,
So
wait. Can you tell me from just start to finish? So what is your ideal structure for what would be allowed in terms of like lobbying or in-kind contributions to candidates or from corporations? What can you outline this for me just so I have this entirely in my head?
okay. So I would say that in, in my solution, and I'm not married to any particular policy. So if there's a better one in mind, then I'm definitely willing to listen to that. But direct campaign contributions, I would end. I would limit corporate campaign ad spending, right? But that they could that interest groups could run ads for individuals in itself, I don't see as a problem. So of counter groups can also do the same thing, right? So if a polluter wants to help a politician that supports polluting, then an environmentalist can support a politician that wants environmental
Okay, so
regulations.
direct contributions to campaigns are ended.
Yeah.
Every campaign would have to spend the same amount of money on advertisements, but an outside group is allowed to raise money and run ads on behalf of that politician or for that politician's issue. Or
Yeah, I would say yeah, but I would limit the amount, right? So that they couldn't flood um, markets with their ads, right? So they would just try to limit, balance the playing field. Maybe some sort of equal amount spending amount. I don't know, but something that will limit the amount. So we don't
wait,
have.
why wouldn't we just include this in like the same amount of money spent on ads? Is that second point? Is that like publicly funded or?
excuse me, the second point in terms of okay. So I'm saying that we could have some sort of outside spending in terms of specifically advertisements.
Yeah, but on the second point, you said you want the same amount of money spent on ads by campaigns themselves.
I mean saying that no, not I didn't say campaigns themselves. I meant the outside groups. So maybe we have a situation in which but you say like outside groups can only spend $100,000 each on this race, right? So like that's it in terms of ad spending, um, and yeah,
So like money spent per company or total amount of money spent?
maybe spent towards a candidate.
Well, yeah, but like let's say 20 companies want to run ads supporting a candidate. Do they have to argue who gets to spend what, or is it per company? Like,
Right? So I don't know. I haven't thought that.
well, because what if one company just made like 20 companies and now they could spend 20 times as much money?
Hmm. So maybe uh, well, if that's the case, well then if one company makes 20 organizations, right? Like we could trace spending back to that company, right? If they're trying to go around these laws. So that's one way of dealing with that.
Well, but like, what
Um,
if 5 companies have a similar owner, but they're way different companies? Like, should Twitch and Amazon independently be able to contribute to a campaign?
oh, I see what you're saying because different companies. Um, well, I would say that um, mm, okay, so possibly per company. Like per company, would limit that. That would probably be the best way to limit these things. But again, I don't know. I haven't fully designed this system, but yeah, sure, we could have it so that.
Well, but so I mean, like, you can obviously see like a million flaws with this, right? So whoever gets the most number of companies to support them is going to have way more ad spending than.
Well, yeah, like I said, hold on, and I said from the very beginning, from the very beginning that we cannot completely even the playing field. I don't expect to, right? I'm saying I'm trying to limit the amount of money. So
Yeah, but we're basically all we're doing in the system is massively fucking over people that can get a lot of public support. Basically, like it feels like we're evening the playing field in a really bad way. Like I'm looking at the past election, like the things that you're suggesting right now would massively help, like billionaires like Steyer and Bloomberg, and it would massively fuck over people like Bernie Sanders, like people that raised a ton of outside money,
so I would say that. Um,
or Yang, right?
oh, yes, I don't care. um, uh, so I would say that. Uh,
Wait, so you don't care about candidates that can be really popular but don't have a lot of companies supporting them?
oh, hold on, no. I'm just saying that in terms of Yang, I don't. It doesn't matter to me. Not part of the Yang gang. So that's all I'm saying.
Well, what about Bernie?
No, I'm saying I care about Bernie. But um, I would think that the way to balance against that would be through organization, right? So like simply because there are. Oh, I don't want to say that. So in terms of these outside ad spending, um, I I simply think that giving a limited amount, right? You're saying that well the one that can raise have the most amount of companies backing them. Um, you pointed to the federal election, right? So within the federal election, there is a lot more visibility to these things. So the amount of money um, uh, spent is blunted by the fact that a lot more information within these races. So the fact that some may have some sort of advantage in here in terms of corporate influence is not in itself just a deciding factor. As we've already stated, right? There's multiple factors that affects these things. So when I'm more concerned I'm concerned with all of it, but I'm also concerned with on the state level. And I don't believe, for instance, that one candidate gets all of the corporate influence, right? That or that every corporation will be interested in this particular candidate. So there are a certain number of interests that might support one, maybe so amount of interests might support another, and not just corporate interests, but other interests like unions and stuff, right? I might be able to support them, and we're simply trying to limit the amount of money so that one group cannot flood the zone, right, and take up all the ads, right? And so exactly how that mechanism works, I'm not exactly sure the best way of doing that. I'd have to put more thought into that. But I think that simply having an unlimited amount of spending is itself a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't want the I wouldn't want the politician that can get the most number of companies behind him to have the most spend. That just seems kind of chaotic.
Oh, I mean, they already do, right?
Do you think most companies supported Bernie Sanders or Mike Bloomberg?
Sorry, so oh, you mean I would say Mike Bloomberg. I mean, in terms of that, but like they
Yeah,
already.
but who got more campaign contributions?
Oh, I'm just talking about specifically corporate lobbying. So you're saying campaign contributions in general. So I'm saying corporate lobbying specifically, and then that would help evened out that more individuals can have a chance of being involved within the process because of that public financing.
What do you mean? You mean just more people running?
I'm saying more individuals have a chance. So like Yang and Tulsi, right? Tulsi being Tulsi, um, she has a chance to compete with others as well. So just like
But so, like, I'm just curious. So, is your success of a system just based on how many people can run for office? Like, is that what you want? You just want elections with like 50 people running for every office?
I
Is
don't
that?
think 50 people will run for every office, but my point is that like we want a place where people aren't crowded out of the system simply due to money. Whatever that system is, right? That makes it so that individuals aren't crowded out due to money. Is a system that I want. That like there is
Okay.
no money
But you seem to
primary.
ignore the fact that people couldn't raise money from outside groups if they were like popular with those groups.
Mm, uh, sorry, in what ways are you saying raise money? Because maybe I've
So let's
already.
say that I live in a very negative environmental state and I want to run as an environmentalist. Maybe I could raise money from environmentalist groups or whatever. But you don't want that to be a possibility, I guess, because
Mm,
you want to ban like
well,
direct
because
contribution.
I'd say that if you are the type to be raising money from them, that you're already at a disadvantage because on the other side, Exxon Mobil, and the people who who are supporting candidate B, who is all for fossil fuel production, right? They already have far more money than you. I think like you will never be able to compete with them. There's because that playing field is what it is. You can't compete with them whatsoever.
Yeah, but if you're going to raise like direct contribution, or if you're going to ban direct contributions now, you truly can never, because if you try to run for office,
You can't
they're going to have way
now.
more companies.
I'm saying right
Well,
now
you
you
could now.
can.
You could. We have examples of like outsider people coming in and overturning these people because they can raise money externally. That's like a huge thing. People like Pelosi or AOC are like driving like fundraising towards candidates from out of state and stuff. Right? In Georgia, there was a ton of out of state
Once
funding as well.
again,
Right?
for those individuals, there are a few individuals who actually can overcome these things with national attention, right? With that national attention, then yes. But for the average politician running an average race that doesn't get that level of attention, that they are simply flooded out and that they cannot compete. And so instead, let's try to even the playing field for them rather than like understand the exceptions. Bernie Sanders is an exception to this rule, right? A person of a national platform who's been within these races, within the public conscious for decades, or at least in the progressive public conscious for decades, right? Then he exploded with his ideas and all that, and it was able to organize. Um, uh,
You could probably get a lot of attention locally on issues that would cause people to support you as well, though, right? Maybe it's not to the national level, but
maybe, or maybe not, or maybe it's a quiet race. Maybe it's a quiet race in
I
which
mean, there's a lot of maybes in here to totally, completely revamp and change our electoral system. I feel like I'd be
no, not
uncomfortable with that.
not maybes. No, I think most elections are low turnout, right? So you agree most elections are low turnout, right? The local event elections don't have the
Mhm.
same amount of turnout federal elections, right? We would
Of
say that
course.
those elections don't have the same amount of visibility with federal elections, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, all right. So there's low turnout, low visibility, and less information about individual candidates, correct?
Yep.
Okay, all right. And so in those cases, I contend that it's extremely difficult for candidates to overcome money influence. So they don't get those advantages that Bernie Sanders had, that AOC had, that Kshama Sawant, I think that's her name, had in Seattle. I think that's her name. Please, I'm sorry if I got it wrong. Um, that those things evaporate because you don't have that attention. You don't get that outside group money, right? To help you counter whatever's on the other side. Most politicians running their local races and the local level and the state level don't get that level of attention, so they don't get that protection.
Okay.
Do you not agree with that?
The local elections don't get as much attention as national elections? Yeah, of course.
Okay, all right. And
But now you're gonna
that
have like,
are you
but
saying? Do you agree with me that? I guess this is the crux of it. That attention is the thing, and the money that comes with it, right? Within our current system, is the thing that
Mhm.
helps them overcome outside corporate influence on the other side, right? So that AOC, like because she got that attention, she was able to overcome all the money interest backing Joe Crowley.
I don't think so. I
Yep.
could be wrong, but I don't think she had a ton of national attention before she won that race, right? Or I
No, she
could be
did.
wrong. I'm trying to remember.
She did have
Did she
national attention. She had
like not? Was it really that much?
so I'm
Like, I know that there are a lot of people talked about a lot of different justice systems, like, oh, like these guys are cool, blah blah blah. But I don't think she had anywhere near the level of attention until she won the race.
Oh
That's when
no,
she got all the attention.
certainly she got more attention after she won the race, right? But before that, she was on these progressive programs. She was had national attention doesn't necessarily mean like NBC News, right? So it can be that like people around the country at like
I don't
uh,
think we
you
would have to
living
we would have to
in
look at something.
I think
I would challenge it. I don't think anybody outside of New York knew who the fuck she was. I think she
hold
was
on,
like
hold
the
on.
total
So you don't think that for instance appearances on like TYT
on YouTube. No, I'm not counting that back then. No.
Okay. So their audience, right? Their audience doesn't send money like that. That none of that happens, right? That
I'm
we
sure that
can't
they did,
raise
but like
groups.
her winning was a massive upset. It's not like she was getting really popular and be like, oh man, AOC is like competitive here. I'm pretty sure that nobody thought she had a fucking shot in hell, aside from extremely leftist people that might follow her on YouTube or whatever. I don't think anybody around the country. It was once she won that she got like massive
No,
national
no, no.
attention.
I understand that she got more attention. My only point is that it brought in the attention that she did get. It doesn't have to be like on NBC News, right? Like the attention that she did get, like that through these progressive outlets, is enough, right? So the one in Seattle, I think it's Kashmir Swant. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Mhm.
That like she didn't get mass amount of attention. I think most individuals, most people, do not know her name. Still don't know her name, right? But within lefty spaces, that like that national attention from those lefty platforms help make the difference. Is my contention.
I'm not sure if that's the case or not. I don't know.
Okay. So all right. Let me, I don't know how to spell this. Uh,
When did she win her seat? Was it in 2016? Was it the first time, or was it 2018? I think it was.
I don't know. So, Seattle. Not Seattle.
Oh, it was 2018. Let me check. Is there a way to see like in-state versus out-of-state campaign contributions, guys? Is there a way to see that? Does anybody know? Also, do you remember what the date was on that election in 2018?
Are you asking me?
Yeah,
Um,
2018
no.
House elections.
So there was a
Was
recall effort. That was a recall effort that I believe I'm thinking of the one she fought. Um, no, this is not it. Huh? The Supreme Court allows efforts to recall. Oh no, sorry. This is more recent. This is more recent. So never mind. What I'm looking at right now is brand new. Because the effort to recall Kashmir Sawant from the Seattle City Council continue following the Washington State Supreme Court ruling issued Thursday. So what I'm looking at right now is actually brand new.
okay. So just real okay. So real quick. So
Hmm,
when she won her primary
exactly.
in June.
Okay.
Okay.
Hmm?
I'm just looking up. So like these are the um, search trends for her. So at least online, before she won that primary, I don't think people were talking about her much at all. I could be wrong. There might be other data showing this, but like this tracks into what I remember. I don't think anybody knew about AOC that much at all until when she won. That was
Oh,
like a shock.
you're back to AOC. Sorry. Um,
Yeah.
19. So I'm looking at Kashmir Sawant. And against Occupy X Amazon ballot initiative urge protesters. Not recall campaign. Okay, August 2020. Socialist misused reckless disregard.
Oh Jesus! And this search data is even for New York. Holy shit!
That's
So nationally, Yeah, like
Occupy. You're saying. Um, Lost company 11. More than years. City tax would have cost company $11 million in order to fund public housing and homes shortly after enacting the tax. Okay, let's watch. Oh, that's not her. Oh, life and oh, this doesn't tell me. Did you put whatever you were looking at within VC chat? I'm not
no
sure
link
if you
in the
did.
base.
Please. Oh, there you go. All right, thank you.
Is it? Maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but let's say that a lot of her campaign contributions came from out of state.
Mhm.
Wouldn't this be another person then that just would have never won in her seat with your new rules?
No, not necessarily, because not so once again, so not just the part of this of her winning was organizing and getting support, getting people to come and help her get out the vote, right? So
Okay, hold on,
getting
real quick. You keep saying the word organizing.
mm,
You know that takes money, right? I don't know what you
yes,
think organizing is. Or I'm curious what you think organizing is.
yeah. So we would do that through the public financing, yeah. So that's what organizing, yeah. There would be public
Yeah, but
financing.
she wouldn't be able to organize this much because now that money would be available to everybody equally. So she would now have the same amount of organizing power as a neo-Nazi that wants to run in this district.
Yeah, but does neo-Nazi get that amount of public support, right? So
He
just
doesn't need the
because
public support now because you don't have because now in PrimeCayes' world, everybody gets the same amount of money to spend on ads from the government.
So I'm saying that just because there's another candidate that has equal amount of money doesn't mean their positions are equally supported, right? So the money doesn't necessarily like spending a certain amount of money doesn't necessarily buy you a certain amount of support, right? But
Yeah, I
it
agree
can
with
get
that.
your
Of course, that's
issues
why
in
I'm
front of
for it. Yeah.
voters.
Sure, but I'm saying that like now in every single state where a single neo-Nazi wants to run, now they have as much money to spend publicly, at least as Bernie Sanders at AOC.
Okay, so like if they run, then they can run and they can lose. They can be embarrassed, right? So the fact
It's not
that
about them being embarrassed. It's about that now we're publicly paying to have their ads on TV. Like my tax money now goes for Nick Fuentes to have an ad on TV so that he can run in his state election.
okay, well, my tax money will also go towards some Republican that I heavily dislike, right? That, in fact, my tax money goes to all kinds of things that I disagree with. That in itself is not a problem. And we could still have like campaign rules about like what exactly they can put on TV, right? So that in itself does not scare me. That
All right,
um,
so now you're going. Wait, so would you want a place like New York, where maybe the state legislature or maybe the DNC is starting to craft rules that would hurt AOC deciding what she's allowed to put her public money towards in terms of advertising spending? What if the moderate Dems there were like, you're not allowed to talk about socialism because that's extremist, so we're going to ban that being mentioned in ads?
okay, so I, I'm saying that we can have. I was so in my role we'd have reasonable rules about like things like of the content in terms of harassment. Like you can't harass another candidate like racially or something like that, right? And I think we or even then like we could rely on because I'm not sure. So I'm not sure under the current system. If it's simply that we rely on advertisers or networks to simply reject these things. So sorry, do you know the current rules? The current rules regarding ads, like what the content of ads now?
Or content of political ad. I think if it's funded by your campaign, I think you just have to directly disclose that you're the one that's funding it, like
Okay,
paid for
sure,
it.
but like could you like put, for instance, like racist content within that, like using the N word, which yeah, like within
Hmm.
within an ad. Like, can a politician come through and say,
I don't know if you can put the N word in it, but you can put pretty racist shit in it,
so
can't you?
okay, so why can't why wouldn't you be able to put the N word in there? So like, I know you can, of course, dog whistle, and people dog whistle all the time, right? Sure, but why wouldn't you be able to put
I think that might violate like the public broadcasting stuff, right? I mean, maybe you could in an internet ad. I don't think that's illegal if you wanted to do it in an internet ad. But generally on public airwaves, there's usually like, or platforms will have like terms of service that allow you to have certain terms or not.
Okay, yeah. So we could rely on those same rules, right? We don't necessarily have to change those rules.
Well, but they would also undoubtedly have to allow like neo Nazis now to run, as long as they didn't have super offensive content. They'd not be running for office. So
Yeah,
you're
and I
using.
think a lot of neo Nazis. I mean, like a fucking, well, I would say that Trump's ads and the ads of many other Republicans right now are super fucking offensive, right? Whatever. So like, I'm
You're
not
not even
scared.
neo Nazis. Like now, you're
So
basically giving carte blanche for neo Nazis to start running in every state because now they're going to get public funding to do so.
okay, sure, but like, and then they can lose publicly, right? Like, whatever. I'm not afraid of extremists being able to run, right? Like they can
Really?
run
What about
now.
Marjorie?
They
What about
can
that
run now.
Marjorie
So
Green
I
Taylor
don't know.
person? No, they
So
can't
you're
run now. A lot
so
of them
what
don't
you're
have the money
doing.
to run, or
So
they
what
don't
you're
have the
doing.
support
So
to run.
what you're doing is saying that there's some sort of a that difference between public and so like this privately a privately funded election, right, where they happen to raise money, right, where there's neo Nazis, right, raise money, um, like versus a publicly funded one, right? So they can raise money now. So they can raise money now, right? They can run, right, and that would and they could get blown out.
Yeah, but I don't think they can raise that much money now. But now you're saying
No,
everybody's going
well,
to be.
do you know that? Is that the case, right? Like,
I don't think
our
neo
elected
Nazis are any.
representatives who like
Yes, I knew exactly what
campaign
I was.
against immigrants, right? Who dog whistle against African
That's not a neo
Americans.
Nazi. That's not a neo
Oh, okay,
Nazi.
but I don't give a shit. They're like a quote unquote a neo-Nazi, right? Like, you're using this word to try to scare me, but it doesn't scare me. So you can keep
Hold on.
trying,
To be
but it
clear,
doesn't.
I'm not using a word. Wait, hold on. To
Okay.
be clear, I'm not using a word to try to scare you,
Hmm.
okay? You are throwing the most extreme examples back at me. So, of course, I'm going to make you account for what would now be both permissible and most likely widespread under your system. So, you've told me, you've advocate
Hmm.
for there to be a public fund that every politician can draw from. And you said that one of your successes would be more people running for office. And what I'm
Hmm.
telling you is there are probably a lot of like neo-Nazi figures that could run for office that now are going to be able to because they're enabled by the public fund. And then your counter to that is, oh, well, that wouldn't matter. They'd lose anyway, which makes me wonder if the money doesn't matter, why are you advocating for any of this in the first place?
I'm saying that the point is to level the playing field so that it's the amount of money, not simply that there is money, is the problem.
Yeah,
So
but why would you want to level the playing field for certain political opinions that are so incredibly toxic they have no support? What you're leveling the playing field for Nazis and you're bringing down incredibly popular figures that get like national level popularity. So people like AOC and Bernie Sanders would be brought down in your system, and people like Nick Fuentes would be massively elevated in your system.
I'm saying that the public, um, I'm relying on the public once presented with these options, right? So like, if we're thinking, right, if under your model that you think that the public is taking all this information and rationally making a decision, right, on who to support, that if that's your opinion, and is that your opinion, right? That they take all this information that's presented to them and they're making straight rational decisions as to who to support.
For the public is taking in information
So
and
yeah,
figuring out who.
like through advertisements, through campaign information, through media, right? Like through interviews, right? They're
I
looking
think
at all of
people
these
vote for a
things.
variety of reasons. Most issues or most voters are probably voting on one or two issues, would be my guess.
Okay, yeah. So I saying under those situations that the public will decide, and in that constituency, right, like wherever it is, right, in that specific geographic area, will be able to decide what they want. So like, if they wanted a person who supports those policies, so like, again, we can ignore the term neo-Nazi because it's whatever, right? But supports those racist positions, right? If that's what they want, then that's what they'll elect, right? If they
Well,
if
but you're saying that, that their decision on who to elect is going to be dramatically shifted by equalizing the money playing field. So, whereas before it might have been that somebody like like a neo-Nazi would be incredibly unpopular in an area because they don't have any money available to them. Well, now that you've equalized the money, you're saying they'd be more
so,
palatable to the average voter
so
because
no,
they
no, I
can
didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. No.
Wait,
So
so you're
no.
saying that
I'm
them, wait, hold on, wait, just so I understand.
okay, sure.
So you're saying that a neo-Nazi that has 0% support, that's now given equal access to the playing field and equal money as other people, will still maintain 0% support?
I'm saying that um, that's support, right? So they might have 0% support because no one knows about them, right? And
Okay.
so that if they are known, that will certainly rise, right? The fact that they have some
Okay.
money
So your
means
system
they
enables neo-Nazis to become more popular, essentially, or very fringe radical opinions become more popular.
sure that
Okay.
fringe opinions can have on the other side, right? So a socialist, right? So on the other side, a socialist also gets raised. So a socialist who also would not have any chance, right? Would not have any corporate support, but also gets that same opportunity, right, to make their case in
Okay.
front of the audience, right? So I'm not
So we're doing
afraid.
a Dave Rubin marketplace of ideas here, basically. We want the marketplace of ideas to decide. Everybody just gets to brawl in the in the WWF
Why
arena of
why
ideas.
shouldn't they be allowed to? Why shouldn't be a neo-Nazi be allowed to, right? Like if
I mean,
they
if you want to take the extremist free speech
do
position,
you
you
do you
can.
think
I think
well, do you have okay, so yeah, so my point is that like everyone should be able to talk. Everyone should be able to talk.
okay.
Yeah. And I'm saying that corporate money drowns out other voices, right? Other viable voices that if they had a chance to make their case in front of the public, that they could get that support. They could get like rise in the polls, right? But because they don't get that support, because there is so much money on the other side, that they are completely shut out of the system. So if you put a neo-Nazi, right? So yes, you are raising their chances, right? Raising their platform because you're providing equal amount of money, right? But
Mhm.
on the other side, there are other candidates who are other quote unquote extremes, right? Who also get that same opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not in favor of the massive restriction of First Amendment rights that you're calling for. That would also end up lowering some like nationally popular figures like AOC or Bernie in exchange for elevating some unpopular figures that may or may not be neo-Nazis. So people like Nick Fuentes. I don't think that trade-off is good. Sacrificing some level of First Amendment rights just to do all of this contrived stuff just to get rid of some corporate influence in politics that you haven't even demonstrated to me exists or is counter to what the public opinion is. It's such a this is a bigger step than voter ID law, where people are like, oh, like I want voter ID to stop voter fraud. It's like, well, we don't even know if voter fraud exists. Like you haven't demonstrated that. Why are you trying to put all these roadblocks up? Like it sounds like the same type of argument. Like we haven't even demonstrated that the
Oh,
corporate influence is bad or counteractive to public opinion. But we want to do all these things that would have like these widespread, dramatically negative impacts on our political system and our political representation.
okay. So I guess I disagree. I say on the other side that uh, all these the cases that I've presented, and there's many others, of course, right? Are
To
cases
be clear, none of those cases demonstrated any of your arguments, but okay.
but be clear, I disagree with you. Right? I very much disagree. Oh, I mean, okay, no, sure. You think that if so,
Not a well, you can't just disagree. None of the things you link show that a politician supported something that was politically unpopular because of a corporate background. None of those showed that.
okay, so um, 1 second, please.
Mhm.
Okay. Uh, okay. Uh, that there, that's and um, okay, working. Oh, 1 second, please. I apologize.
No problem.
Yeah. Answer the federal government. Uh,
Okay, hold on.
Sorry.
Or you can ignore me. I'm just talking. Hold on. So GSU Gambit says Destiny's asking Prime something that's hard to defend against. There's not going to be an easy way to separate what voters want and what politicians push. For instance, lots of Georgians might not be for the suppression of African American vote, but because the party is pushing that, they agree with it. So Gambit, I agree with you that just because you vote for somebody doesn't mean that you endorse every single opinion they have. Now, I will say that it's funny that a lot of people on the left will say that every single Republican necessarily endorses every single opinion that Trump has. But I think you're conservative, so I won't hold you to that one, even though I know a ton of fucking lefties will say that over and over again. But I do agree with you. But my question would be, is that what I would expect to see is one of two things happen. If there is a politician that supports a given policy that you don't agree with, but you support their platform, then what I would expect to happen is during the next primary season, they would have challengers that would closely match their platform, say for the issue that the constituents disagree with, that would either cause them to lose the election or moderate their position on or change their position on it. So, for instance, we can argue that most moderate Democrats probably wouldn't have been for a 15-an-hour minimum wage. However, it seems like a lot of Americans are in favor of a 15-an-hour minimum wage. But rather than politicians just being like, well, you support the rest of my platform, fuck you, what appears to happen is when other candidates like Warren or Bernie Sanders are on the national level running in those elections, now your mainstream politicians, so famously Hillary Clinton was moved on it, started to support the 15-an-hour minimum wage, and then Biden himself seemed to be on board with the 15-an-hour minimum wage. Those are the types of things that I would expect to see happen if that was the case.
He's not exactly GSU Gambit. I know him. He's not exactly conservative. He's a
Oh, okay,
Democrat.
fuck. I thought because every time he comes on, it seems like he's arguing against the more extreme left people. So I didn't know if he was a conservative.
He's
But
not a
okay, sorry.
conservative. I see you out there, GSU Gambit. You're not a conservative.
Okay,
Um,
sorry. I'm sorry for assuming that.
sure. No problem. Okay, all right. Support the great let's see. Support for. Okay, all right. So, Liberal Democrats, conservative. So, survey result. And okay, so what do you think of the Green New Deal?
I'm not a big fan of it.
Not a big, not a big fan. Oh, I figured not. Do you say that our political system isn't generally in favor of the? Excuse me. Oh, would you say on the national level?
On a national level, there's probably a lot of people that support it that have no idea what's in it. That would be my guess. It sounds good.
No,
but
sorry. Excuse me. My fault for being not clear. In terms of our political system, in terms of Democrats and Republicans, within like Nancy Pelosi and her crew. So, like, do you think there's broad support within the parties for that?
It's probably higher in the Democrat Party than the Republican one, but it would probably depend on how the polling question is asked, kind of like Medicare for all.
No. Again, the politicians. Do the politicians support that? Do you find evidence that
Oh,
politicians?
no, I don't think it has very many co-signers or many other people willing to support the bill. No.
Okay, all right. So, but on the other end, 81% of the public supports this, right? So, if you ask all registered voters, it's 81% who support, and then 18% who do not. Among Democrats, it's 92% that support altogether. Among independents, 88%, or among Republicans, 64%, right? And these are all these are registered voters, right? Because I know you don't care about everyone else, and fair enough, which is fair, which is actually a fair distinction. I won't go against you there. And then Liberal Democrats 93%. So okay, I'll just send it to you. I'll just in VC chat. Excuse me.
Sure, and I'll send you this right here. So, a lot of Americans will support the Green New Deal, but the more they learn about it, the quicker that it starts to drop the support. Basically, Americans support many promises of the Green New Deal, but not its price tag. So, for instance, you might get high support for guaranteed jobs with good wages, upgrade all buildings to energy efficiency, blah, 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 blah. So there's like 78%, 70%, 69%. But then when you get down to increase federal spending by trillions of dollars, 30% agree. Or reduce the number of coal mining jobs in the US, 55% agree. Right? So basically what I just said. Is that
Okay,
just
okay.
like, yeah, the Green New Deal sounds good, but I'm willing to bet that even you don't know everything in the Green New Deal, and it's not even that complicated. It's like 8 pages long.
So,
Um,
okay.
mhm.
So, the very fact that there are parts of the Green New Deal where individuals disagree, right? Like on very, like that doesn't surprise me, like at all, right? There are going to be provisions within any large package, which more people are in support of, and some more people are against, right? That's fine,
Okay.
right? Now, what we want to see is whether those things are being pushed, where those that support is being reflected within the politicians, right? Like for those popular issues, very least,
Mhm.
right? Okay. So if you could, you sent me something. Did you put it in VC chat?
Yeah.
That in there. So let's take a look at that. Um,
And I don't even think there's a big drive in members of Congress to do anything with the Green New Deal either, because the
okay.
legislation doesn't really say anything. It doesn't bind you to
Okay.
anything except
Sure. Sure.
like,
Sure. Hold on. No. 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 So like again, so the Green New Deal is a package, right, of ideas. And
yeah,
that.
like vague ideas that don't really have any like explicit
Okay.
stuff
So
mentioned about
that's
in them.
fine. Whatever. Whatever. Right. Right. But you said you had polling data on this, right, in terms of the decline depending on which
Yeah, I
policy.
linked you.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
It's in VC chat. It's above
The Washington
Prime.
Post one?
Wait, hold on.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, okay. So I think it's the
Mhm.
Washington Post. Let's take a look at this. Haven't heard. All right, so graph. Okay, I think that's what you're talking about. Guaranteed jobs, good wages for all U.S. workers. Upgrade all buildings. U.S. to increase energy efficiency. Okay, great. Set a goal of 100% of U.S. power coming from zero emissions. Energy sources. All right. Okay, provide all people in the U.S. with health care through a new government program. Okay, 68% for that. Increase federal spending on infrastructure. Prepare for climate change related disasters. Great, great, great. Um, Major new regulations. Okay, so everything but the actual spending itself. Okay, which is not surprised. There's a sticker shock. All right, that doesn't surprise me at all. Um, Many jobs. All right. So, so breaking down this package, do we see support among politicians, right? Equivalent support to to this legislation, right? Looking at these polls, right? Look at these polls. Do we see equivalent support that for the individual? So obviously, like not every individual program will cost the government trillions and trillions of dollars. It will cost a certain amount of money, certainly. But like not all these individual things will cost that much money. So like we see popularity there. Do we also see that in terms of actual policy being moved within Congress, right?
Possibly, you could argue that some of the more popular positions. You could argue that like stuff kind of related to. I don't know if we would consider like unions or right to work laws being kind of related to this. We see that as being part of the huge Biden, it's a $2.9 trillion bill.
Yeah, I think it's 2.5, but I could be wrong.
2.5. Yeah, you see like that the elimination of right to work in like 26 different
Yeah,
states.
but
Like,
that's not what's included here. I don't believe from
yeah,
what
not
you're
exactly.
showing me. Okay, yeah.
But
Um,
like climate policy stuff has always had this problem where people will support the idea of like, oh, like let's help the climate. But
mhm.
then when it comes down to the nitty gritty, people are like, well, hold on, we don't want to like fuck our jobs over it, right? That's why the AFL-CIO won't sign on to the Green New Deal. Or other like fossil fuel unions are usually so opposed to green energies because they're worried about losing their jobs.
Okay. So uh, a job guarantee. So like, do we see? I don't know if there was any sort of job guarantee within that
In the Green
infrastructure
New
bill.
Deal?
No,
Oh,
the
the infrastructure
infrastructure.
bill, I don't believe so, no.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Yeah. Okay. Um, I think there's something about upgrading buildings. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but like I believe there's something about that.
I want to say it's 300 billion or it might be 155 billion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Upgrading buildings. Somebody can look up there. I know the WAPO is like a huge breakdown of all of it. There's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
money in
yeah.
there.
Yeah. So my point is that like if we're not seeing that we're not seeing equivalent support within the overall legislative body for these things, right? It's because there's other influences, right? So like if the public's supporting it and these politicians are not, why is that the case? Why is there a discrepancy there?
Well, I think the very reasonable answer is because you've wrapped up something in an amorphous bill that doesn't really make any solid claims, so people
So,
don't even know what they're
so
supporting.
no.
If you're going to suggest that it's because of corporate influence, I think you'd have to
I'm
demonstrate.
not talking about the whole bill in general. So you've made a good point about the bill. Okay, fine, sure. Excuse me, the Green New Deal in general, sure, right? But then you brought up these statistics in terms of each individual policy, right? And how they could be popular, right? Are we seeing this level of support for that, right? Are we seeing support in terms of like in terms of like for instance putting more electric um, like upgrading the grid, right, and doing all these things that might go against the interests of fossil fuel companies. So like whatever those interests are against fossil fuel companies, any of these legislative priorities that would necessarily go against those, like do we see the
Probably not, but you have to
okay.
keep in mind the interests of fossil fuel companies are probably going to be really closely aligned with the interests of fossil fuel unions, like workers that are working in these unions.
Okay, but there are other interests, right? So there are other interests that um, uh, could present themselves in front of Congress, right?
Sure.
Can present themselves, and they can raise money, right? And so
Mhm.
they should be able to have an equal say on all this, right? Like they're simply presenting their ideas. The corporate money is using its voice, and then these other unions and stuff are they presenting their voice, right? So they should be at least equal, and then overall, like, so if these forces are equal, do you think these forces are relatively equal? They
I
wash
have
out.
no idea. That would be on you to demonstrate. Do the majority of Americans support this? And
No. So I'm talking about these forces in terms of these influences, like in terms of lobbying, these lobbying influences. Are these things equal?
I have no idea who, in terms of who spends money for what. I have no idea.
Yeah. So again, I would point you back to the statistics that I pointed out before that that corporate interests vastly outweigh, right?
You
In
can't
terms of
take corporate interests across the entirety of the US economy versus lobbying groups across the entirety of the US economy and then pretend that that is going to hold true for every single individual sector. You might be right. You can probably just look it up. Like corporate, so corporate lobbying versus environmental lobbyists, I guess. You could
sure.
look for something like this. I mean, you might not be wrong, but that number that you just gave
So
um, doesn't help. Hold on. Give me like 2 seconds. In the United States, the largest spenders on lobbying turn out to be both those dirty firms that emit a lot of greenhouse gases and those clean firms that emit comparatively little. That finding comes from new research authored by Magali Delmas, a professor of management in UCLA's Institute of Environment and Sustainability, as well as UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Their findings were recently published in the Academy of Management Discoveries. Delmas and her co-authors look at sectors ranging from automobiles to chemicals to food and beverages. These firms spent a billion, 1.1 billion in climate lobbying during that period. The researchers found that clean firms also invest in lobbying in support of government regulations as a business strategy to gain market advantage over their competitors. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe it's equal then. But if you have
so
something different, you can show me. But this is just
did you send me what you're looking at? I can take a look.
sure. I literally just ripped this off of Google. This is just UCLA. Maybe there are other studies that contradict it, but here is
Oh,
this.
cool. Okay, so what is a clean firm?
I guess is a clean firm is a firm that tries to like stay carbon neutral or something.
I
It
don't know.
says.
Researchers found that clean firms also invest in lobbying support of government. Findings were published. Take a look at that. The prevailing view is that it's environmental regulation which provides incentive to lobby. Find access to database. Um, such spending is largely perceived as a strategy. To investigate how firm level performance and salient political issues affect. So could we address the issue of this context of the recent climate?
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I propose a U-shaped relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and lobbying expenditures to test our proposition. study leverages data on greenhouse gas emissions and lobbying expenses aimed specifically at climate transition. We test our move novel data on firm level gas emissions and lobbying expenses aimed at specifically at climate change legislation. So it looks at gas emissions itself. Okay. All right. I don't. Okay. Our result based on these firms suggests that both dirty and clean firms are active in lobbying, which challenges the view of adversarial corporate. So this only challenges the view of adversarial corporate strategy. So the prevailing view is that salient political issues such as environmental regulations are a threat at the industry level. This suggests that best performers have little interest in the policy outcome, and one would not expect them to lobby. In contrast, the hunch that drives the authors is that the cleanest firms may perceive a more stringent environmental regulation as an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage, which provides an incentive to lobby. Okay. The findings of this study have implications for research authors practice which benefit the field. Okay, so so this is only says that yeah, like other interests would lobby. So we have one interest in terms of, again, it doesn't tell me what clean firms are. So I'd have to, I don't know, look through this whole thing and maybe find out what it means by exactly a clean firm is. But that these firms don't have, like, that there's an assumption that they don't have an interest in lobbying. I suggest they do have an interest in lobbying, right?
Yeah, but they lobby on the other side. You were asking me earlier,
So
who do you think
if
lobby?
they're a corporate, if they're a corporate interest, right, then and these are firms, right? These are firms, so I'm assuming they're a corporate interest. I'm assuming that's what they mean. That the fact that they have money to be able to lobby on the other side itself, like a corporation, yes, can raise that amount of money to lobby. So none of that surprises me that these two firms will be able to lobby. I'm talking about like other interests beyond corporate interests, right? So other interests outside of that. So and just because like it's a clean firm doesn't mean that like whatever they want, like they could want to change the market in such a fashion that benefits their clean energy, but doesn't benefit the consumer, right? You could
With
agree with
that,
that.
yeah, of course. That's how all things work. Yeah,
Great,
of course.
great. So like I'm not seeing how this paper helped like
You
says
asked me explicitly. You just asked me, who do you think is lobbying more, like in benefit of like clean energy versus against clean energy? And I said,
so.
well, I don't know. Let's look it up. And we looked at both, and it looked like it was about equal on both sides, according to this one thing. It might not be equal, but according to this one thing, it seems to
So
be.
no, this is so I'm talking about in corporate interest, like within corporate interest. So like those were just like two corporate interests fighting each other. So like it's not surprising to me that multiple
There's going to be
people.
corporate interests on every single side of every single issue, no matter what. Always. What do you mean? Like, can
Maybe
you think of a single issue ever where there wouldn't be corporate interest on some side in the United
my
States?
point is like on the other side in terms of things that aren't backed by corporate interests. So like whatever like groups that aren't backed by corporate interests, whether they have an equal say in all this. In fact, I say I know that they don't. I've already presented evidence to say that they don't. Um, so so like there's not a balance within these issues. So the fact that the corporate firms can raise a certain amount, whether they are for clean energy or or fossil fuel energy, right? Sure, okay, that's fine because they have that corporate structure. But can ordinary people present their ideas, their policy proposals, right, and get an equal amount of time? Can they
And if they
speak in
join a
equal?
group and
Can they
raise money
speak?
for it, right? There are environmental groups that do
But
that.
we can see from the data that they don't. So again, for every dollar spent by unions and public interest groups on direct lobbying that year, 2012, businesses spent $34. Right. So like we can see that just on the other side, there isn't an equal amount of speech being made. So if corporate money equals speech, we can see there's not an equal amount. Right. So the amount of time that they have.
Well, can we I'm just curious if that's actually true.
Okay.
So here's what I'm able to look up on Open Secrets.
Mhm.
The amount spent on lobbying from, I assume these are all environmental groups, Nature Conservancy, Clear Path Foundation, Partnership for Conservation. So it looks like in the 2020 cycle, they spent $17 million lobbying. I wonder how much did other companies spend?
Companies again.
Like firms. What? Again, what?
Sorry. Sorry. Say the first part again. I apologize.
No, this is how much like conservation groups, not
Okay. Oh, sorry.
corporations,
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. That was how many?
spent. They spent 17 million in the 2020
Okay.
cycle. So I'm
Okay.
curious how
So
much other groups spent related to
fossil,
corporate lobbying on climate change.
corporate expenditures. Was industry spent billions. Control the climate crisis. PR spending. America's. Search. Counting investments and public relations programs like beach cleanups. There was on advertisements. So, if someone has what we're looking for, please feel free to DM us. We're looking for this information right now as we speak. My DMs are open, so feel free to DM us if you have the information right now. Fossil fuel, lobbying. Obviously, policy. Battles during COVID. New research from was that oil and gas sector to have dominate climate.
It's one in your chat link to Forbes article.
I'm not looking at my chat. If you guys could put it in the VC chat, that'd be useful. But, ventures from the industry seeking deregulation for fossil fuels and have found out pro-climate interventions for non-fossil corpus have been over twice as likely to succeed based on detailed assessment of quick wins. So the research has tracked 121 lobbying globally that were relevant to the COVID-19 crisis. The vast majority of these are associated with fossil fuel. Smaller number barely consists of top. Like green recovery. No research tracked. Positive lobbying. Either of these top line statements. Take a look. Shell paid 49 million. Their climate lobbying. Thank you, Internet Gas, for that. Oil and gas giants spend millions lobbying to block climate change policies. So every year, are you already looking at this?
Yeah, I already read it.
Okay. 200 million on lobbying designed. So every year, the world's 5 largest publicly owned oil and gas, 200 million. Right? And you said 1.5 million for the other side.
I think it was 17 million.
17 million. Okay. All right. So there you go. These things aren't equivalent, no matter what. So like you could say, individual groups, like individual, can just band together to have an equal amount of speech, or to have
Never
an
said an
equal sorry, to have an equal
Mhm.
chance to present their opinions
Mhm.
to Congress, to policymakers. I think they actually don't have that ability. That in terms of 200 million on lobbying designed to control a layer block climate, like like if you're concerned about the amount and I mean, I think this clearly shows that it's massively skewed to one side, correct?
Yeah, possibly, but it still doesn't show me that it's contrary to what voters would want, which is what I actually care about. I don't care who's donating the money. I care about whether or not politicians are voting in ways that are contrary to what voters would want.
Okay, so I would say that. Hold on, it's not, one second. Let me take a look at this. Okay, so addressing climate change. All right, so let's take a look at that. Position company as a climate expert, acknowledging climate concern while ignoring solutions. The report said that. Okay, all right. So let's take a look directly at the support. Yes, big tech and climate policy. Okay. Great. What should big tech companies in terms of minimizing emissions of that big tech companies do not appear to. Public policy, public opinion, or sorry, voter opinion, excuse me, voter opinion on climate change policy. Okay. Because that's what you care about, right? Voter opinion on climate change policies.
Yeah, and whether or not like campaign contributions are causing people to vote in different ways, because this is what I would say we should care about.
Okay, so there's 2 trillion, 40% is climate. Okay, another climate power. Latinx voters are predicting 8%. Search for. Excuse me. And thank you for the patience from the audience as we like literally work this out in real time. I think we had different expectations as to the evidence that would be presented and what would be convincing. But that's okay. Unfortunately,
Well,
views.
to be clear, I
Oh,
just wanted any evidence whatsoever.
okay. All right. Well, all right. Whatever. All right. Tend to be
I'm
divided.
sorry for that.
Yeah, that's fine. I found that 86% Democrats consider climate change a major threat compared to only 31% of Republicans. 70% of Democrats think dealing with global climate change should be a top priority this year, and then 46% in 2015, while only 21% of Republicans. Okay, great. So we can see that there's a massive amount of public support for policy change in terms of. Oh, sorry. I'll send you one.
Wait, this doesn't broad support for something doesn't prove anything, right? Like this has historically been the problem with climate change is that everybody supports a quote unquote green environment. Everybody supports quote unquote good climate change policies. But the problem is when you start attaching a price tag to things, when you start saying, well, this is what it's going to take to do it, the support falls off a cliff. This is the problem. So just saying like, well, oh my God, all these Americans support this happen. It's like Brexit. Over half of Great Britain supported Brexit, but then when it actually came time to figure out how to do it, now there's no agreement anywhere, right?
Hmm. Is there polling? Um, I'm wondering because within the infrastructure plan, there's stuff that tackles climate, right?
Mhm.
So I wonder if there's polling on individual um, pieces of that legislation, right? Like what are we people in support of? Um, mm, structure.
Destiny, misunderstanding Brexit is the highlight of my weekend. PrimeCayes, if you think there's something I misunderstand about it, please tell me. If you're Britain or if you're British, there's a good chance that you know fucking nothing about it, or the EU. If you want to argue about either of those, go for it. But what 100%, I'm open.
Okay.
My DMs are open, my dude. Oh, sorry, don't mind me. I'm
No,
just
no,
trying
no,
to be
that's
funny.
fine. Yell at them. It's fine. Infrastructure plan. PDF. Um,
The Tories lied about what Brexit would mean to the people of the UK, but do go on. Hey, Ditz or whatever. If Farage driving around in a bus with a stupid fucking slogan on it was the thing that happened to turn all of the United Kingdom in favor of Brexit, then maybe your little fucking socialized education over there isn't doing half the job that you think it is. Because holy fuck, how fucking brain dead stupid. No wonder you guys lost the largest fucking world empire. If that's all it took was that conniving little fuck rolling around in that bus to turn all of you in favor of Brexit. Come on, dude, don't be so fucking stupid. People voted for Brexit because they were scared about immigrants and because neoliberal economic policies left large sectors of the economy behind. That's why people did it. They're scared of outsiders taking their jobs, and they're worried that globalization is fucking over their economy. That's why Brexit happened. This has been fucking sourced like a million fucking times. You can go and read it any other place you want. If you want
so
to imagine that it was because, oh, people thought more 300 million quid would go to the NHS, but if you want to pretend that that's the case, and you can do whatever makes you feel better, fucking want. Sorry. What?
um okay. So uh I'm curious though. For
Mhm.
general polling, so you're talking about how like when you're talking about paying for something, right?
Mhm.
That support decreases. Is that different for any other policy proposal? Is that just
Um,
like how things are?
Well, no, I mean, like it depends on the policy proposal. Like some things are popular, but then when you learn more and more about them, they become less popular depending on what the costs entail.
Yeah, okay. So like if this is a so what I'm asking is this is just a general thing, like a general like truth of polling.
Yeah, generally, yeah. Well,
So
it's why it's
for
frustrating when people will pull like, oh, like I support everybody supports this one thing. It's like, okay, but do they support the costs associated with it? Because if
sure.
they don't, and that's where you get to these huge issues where it's like, oh, 85% of Americans support this thing, but legislation won't pass it. And then people like you will come and say, well, it's because of corporate lobby. It's like, well, no, it's because the actual legislation itself is a lot more complicated than just broadly supporting something. We have to pay to get these things generally. There has to
So
be some
are
give and
there
take.
things that have been passed that have a high price tag to them? For instance, I don't know, like tax cuts for the rich, right?
Mhm.
Are there things that that have a high price tag that are not popular by the general public, right? That the public does not want, but have been passed any which way, right? That that necessarily the fact that one the public doesn't support something with a high price tag, like for, I don't know, the wars that we've been our endless wars that they have a high price tag. That necessarily isn't the thing that stops our
I think that wars are probably the tax cut. I think is maybe a stronger example for you. Wars are
mm,
probably the worst example for you
mm,
because wars are things that when they're incredibly popular
mm,
publicly, we have a fuck ton of support and money for them, and
mm,
then as they become less and less popular,
mm.
we eventually we just leave. Right? That's what happened in Vietnam. That's what happened in Iraq. Right?
I mean, but we're still in Iraq, right? Still
No,
in
the presence there is severely
sure
reduced.
whatever,
Like
but we're still there, correct? Still spending money there, right? Like the price tag is increasing, correct? So
in Iraq or Afghanistan compared to what we used to
Afghanistan.
spend.
No,
No,
no, no,
wait.
no, 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 no. Are we still there? Are we still spending money, right, on
Yeah, but
wars
that's
that are?
probably like a drop in the bucket compared to our overall
No,
military
sure.
budget.
Like spending might have decreased. I'm sure spending has decreased because we don't have as many active troops there. Sure. Okay. Great. And we're not doing as many operations there. Sure. Great.
And that
Um,
was all in response to public pressure, right?
is that so? I'm saying that, but the money itself is not um, a reason why something may not always be a reason why something may or may not be passed, right? So you're saying the crux of the reason why least what I'm getting from you is that the crux of the reason why these other things, these environmental issues, are not passing is because of the price tag,
It
right?
doesn't always have to be the price tag. I'm just saying that, like, asking, like, "Are you in favor of this particular thing?" And people will say yes, but then when you
Mhm.
start to get into what do you have to give for it, it might be cost of, like, money, or it might be something different. Then people will say, like, "Okay, well, hold on, I don't support this," right?
Okay, yeah, people will change their mind when they hear a price tag, so it's easier to sticker
Yeah.
shock individuals,
It's not
right? But that
say
doesn't
st
mean,
wait,
but
wait, wait,
that's
hold on. No, 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 wait, wait.
okay.
I've gotta push back on this
Sure,
because
sure,
this is
sure.
just rhetoric from you. It's not just sticker shock.
Mhm.
It might legitimately be like, this is a cost that I'm not okay with, even if I
Fair
knew
enough.
everything.
Fair
You may have
enough.
an argument with your wife about
Okay.
whether or not you can do anal, and she says yes, and you're like, "Oh, cool." And then she's like, "Well, you have to come with me to Thanksgiving and Christmas to my parents." And you're like, "I fucking hate my in-laws. Now I don't wanna do it," right? That
Sure.
doesn't mean that you had sticker shock. It just means that you don't think that the cost is worth the benefit. That's totally reasonable for all sorts of legislation. Well, you might
Just
think that some particular initiative is a good idea, but the cost isn't worth the benefit. I highly, highly, highly push back against you. You've used this phrase over and over again to just call it sticker shock, like it's just
hold on,
some
hold on.
irrational.
I literally just use it once, so I'll say I
No,
use
no,
it
no,
over and
wait.
over again.
You haven't used it once. You've used this term like 5
You know
times
what?
in this
Sticker.
conversation.
No, sorry. Play back the VOD. Did I use this 5 times? Like I just used the words,
Okay,
the term
it might
sticker
have been
shock.
3 or 4 times, but you've said it
No,
more than twice. You've said
no,
it
I've
like 3 or 4
never
times.
said.
Sticker shock.
I've just no,
You
I
don't remember saying sticker shock multiple times in this conversation.
no, I don't. No, I
Okay,
don't.
you
So
have. I
someone,
don't, you
you guys at home, you're gonna clip it for us. If I said it multiple times, then I am completely not remembering this. But
Okay, that's fine. Okay. I'm just saying that when you say that, it makes it sound like my position is like absurd, like, "Oh, it's just sticker shock." Like you've said that multiple times.
no, I don't
And yeah.
believe I have said it multiple times. But
Okay.
and one way or the other, your point that like the cost is not worth the actual price. Yeah, yeah, people can make that assessment on all kinds of things, right? At
Mhm.
least, but that doesn't mean that the benefit itself is not popular. And I'm saying that that can happen across the board in all kinds of different policies, correct? Right? Like
Of
that
course,
might that otherwise have support, right? So, for instance, like social security, right? The
Mhm.
idea that we would spend this amount of money to help our elderly individuals be supported, right? Like the amount of money that's spent on Social Security is absolutely massive, but there still has a certain amount of support, right? But like if you had said at the outset, right, well, this is what it's going to cost on X year, right, to continue this, continue this policy, you might have very little support from the public, right? That doesn't mean that the public overall does not want this policy,
I
right?
don't know if that's true, but I would have to look in the beginning when Social Security was suggested if we always thought that more was gonna be going into it than what came out of it, right? Because it's like a retirement fund. Like, how much you get out of Social Security depends on how
But
much you put into it.
if we had an accurate projection, right, an accurate projection for people to say like what these things would cost in the future, right? Would you say that it's certainly a possibility that people would have reacted the same way as in terms of climate change, the trillions of dollars, right? They would say like, well, the amount of money that's going to be spent in this program, there's another way. There's another way that maybe not this way, but like you're telling me it's going to cost this much money, we shouldn't be spending all that money. There's other things, there are other priorities that we could be spending these things on.
Well, I think I don't I'm maybe? I don't know if Social Security is directly comparable because, like, I don't think Social Security comes out of, like, the general fund, right? Like, we pay for that with, we have a specific tax just for Social Security. But ignoring that, I guess if I'm just I think that if people were to look at the cost benefit of it, let's say that it did pretend it all came out of general fund or whatever,
Mm.
I'm pretty sure that people would probably still be on board with it because most people wanna get, like, some form of retirement from the government. It's like some amount of, like, Social Security basically, right? A Social Security net for retirees. I think most people are seeing that's like Social Security even today still seems to be a relatively popular program that nobody wants to see cut, including
Because
Republicans.
people right now are receiving the benefits of that, right? So people right now, they understand like what it can do for them. They've
Mhm.
seen evidence of their parents and their parents' parents, right? And what Social Security has done for them, and they can expect those benefits hopefully for themselves, right? So of course there's going to be massive support for that. But if you could actually give them an actual projection, right? I think we could see that, and I don't know how much has been spent Social Security in general, but like it might be a similar price tag, right, to the Green New Deal, right? Like maybe probably probably much more than that, right? And that people might have said, um, faced with that, okay, there's this thing has a certain price tag, and it's not worth it, right? The benefits, you know what?
I mean, you would have to show me that, like, back then that when Social Security was implemented, that people weren't talking about it being expensive. Like, I'm not saying that every single potentially expensive thing will fail. Look at Biden's recent coronavirus stimulus or the
Mhm.
coronavirus stimulus that happened under Trump. I think
Hmm.
the United States was like pretty high in terms of how much social funding we provided compared to other countries, especially now, compared to any other country, even in Europe. We're fairly we're on the upper end of that. So I mean, like even things with the high price tag. I'm not saying that every high price tag item is not going to be supported. I'm just
Hmm.
saying that like it changes how people support things, right?
Sure, sure. Yes, that is one factor, and many other factors as to why people might support something, right? So the fact that um, when it comes to the Green New Deal or these other climate policy things, right, that they have a price tag, which is expensive, that turns people off, doesn't mean that otherwise they shouldn't be able to pass, right? That in itself is not always the deciding
Well, like,
factor
it depends
when
on what
something
costs we're
passes.
talking about, though. So, for instance, when we look
Exactly.
at Medicare for all polling, like, a lot of people were in favor of quote unquote Medicare for all, but then when a lot of them found out that it meant that they had to lose their private insurance, then the numbers flipped on it. So, I mean, like, it depends, and that's probably a trade-off that a lot of people um, will never be willing to accept. So, I mean, it just depends on what the particular cost is. But then there are some costs that some people probably be okay with it, like legalizing marijuana or gay marriage in certain states.
Mhm.
There's going to be social costs associated with that. And, it seems like even when taken into account on that, people are like, yeah, fuck it. I think we should legalize it, whether it's gay marriage or marijuana. So, I mean, it depends on the piece of legislation. This is hard.
No.
I wish I could tell you that like it's really easy just polling and voting on all of these single like issues like unilaterally, but of course these are complicated things.
Okay, great. So, exactly, they're very complicated things, right? Um, so, but the only thing I'm addressing is that you're saying that um, was what sounded like an assertion that the price tag necessarily um, makes it impossible for these climate policies to be enacted, right? That's what
No,
it's
what I'm
done. That
saying
was
is
was the implication
no,
that I
no, no, no,
heard.
hold on. It wasn't an implication. I can directly tell you,
Okay,
okay?
sure.
If you ask a classroom full of students
Hmm.
if they want to have 7 recesses
Hmm.
every single Friday, and all of them say, yes, we do. And then the legislation that's brought before the student board is, all right, guys, we're going to have 7 recesses on Friday, but you all have to go to school on Saturday now. And then they vote no. You can't come in and go like, well, hold on. Why is the polling data of the students so much different than the legislation? There must be some outside corrupting influence here. The real answer would be, well, people were in favor of a particular like end goal that they thought was good, but when they saw the price tag associated with it, well, now their mind changed. It didn't require any corrupting outside influence. It was just that once an actual piece of legislation was addressed, then the idea around that particular piece of legislation is going to be different than the broad idea around what the legislation was trying to get us to.
Okay, sure, but we could have data on the other side saying that there was other influences, right? So, like, if we had data on the other side in terms of this, right? There were parents saying that, like, if this gets enacted, right, then or the teacher saying that they're gonna like triple your homework, right? That uh, like there was a lobby, the teacher lobby, saying that, oh, okay, sure, 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 but if you guys do this, we'll triple the amount of work you have to do. The people saying, okay, uh, uh, that's a problem for me, right? Like, so like a lobby on the other side, like pushing, like putting that influence on the system could alter uh, could alter those results, right? So like a powerful lobby, one that requires a lot of force in terms of weight, in terms of these teachers, or in terms of money, in terms of corporate influence, right? On the other side could change the outcome.
Yeah, we'd have to demonstrate that. Theoretically, I could imagine that happening. Sure.
Okay, great. All right. Oh, okay, great. So we established again, establishing this, right? And then we're
All you
seeing.
gotta establish. I'm not going to take away the hypothetical from you. It's possible. But to act like that's a foregone conclusion is just not even remotely close. We haven't demonstrated it at all. We're just saying it's possible. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is impossible. That'd be foolish of me to do. And it could still be the case that I'm wrong. Maybe in the future we do find something out that changes things. But in the meantime, it's hard for me to envision how so many things that are so like corporately unpopular can get passed with like widespread like public support. So for instance, like the Trump tariffs. Like I don't think en masse corporations are supporting losing billions of dollars in trade to other companies, but that's exactly what happened. Or look at Brexit. Holy shit, that's something that would have been entirely unpopular among most firms in the United Kingdom. But that still passed due on top of
I,
like public support. Like you can find things
okay.
like this in public support that are massively opposed to what corporate interests would be. So it seems to me that there's like a more important driver there. And then on top of that, if I was looking to make our electoral system better, before I even get close to touching shit like lobbying, I would be way more concerned with stuff like mandatory voting. That would be like the number one biggest change, or even getting rid of first past the post. These are things that would have a 100-fold greater impact on our system than whether or not like corporations are lobbying too much on some side when I can't even prove that there's some causal relationship there, or even like a correlated relationship there.
So can things ever pass that are unpopular with the public, right? Can
No, things that are, I'm saying things are passing that should be wildly unpopular with corporations.
yeah. But can things pass that are unpopular with the public?
I can't like major piece of legislation. I can't seem to find that being the case.
There's no piece of major legislation that's unpopular with the public that's passed. Nothing.
Not that I can think of. I mean, there might have been at some point, but I can't think of any. No.
We can look at corporate tax cuts or tax cuts for wealthy, right? And see how they were.
Corporate tax cuts do seem to be unpopular. The
Okay.
Trump tax do seem to be unpopular, but I think that they were popular with the. I think that they still held an over 50% in the Republican Party, and they were the ones that owned all parts of the government. So
Okay. So let's see that. Tax cuts for the wealthy, right? Um, so you're saying that among the GOP base, those were popular, just tax cuts for the wealthy.
I think they were over 50%.
It's a budget. That's better now. Okay.
But keep in mind as well that that big Trump tax cut, that was not just tax cut for the wealthy. That was like a whole batch of like changes in the tax code that also benefited middle and lower class people as well, even if it did disproportionately benefit wealthy Americans. Like I believe, something can be wrong, it's been a long time since I looked at this, but I think it expanded the standard deduction. I think it made it greater, and I think it expanded the child tax credit as well. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Okay. TCGI. Impact on the top 1% taxpayers, 1.6 million taxpayers reported. With that amount, all taxpayers declined by 64 billion. The amount of these high earners owned would increase by 60. Excuse me. By the way, all taxpayers bore about 40% of the income tax burden due to the federal government. Okay, this doesn't show popularity. Realize. So let's say Bush. 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 All thanks could expire. Polls thinks this is in 2010. Most think some Bush tax cuts should expire. Okay, so should tax cuts for $250,000 plus be allowed to expire? Yes, expire 56%. Saying those taxes should expire. Okay. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the Bush tax cuts were made permanent.
Under Trump, it's possible, yeah.
I thought it was under Obama. It was Bush tax cuts.
Maybe it was under Obama. I don't know.
Okay. Bush tax cuts made. Obama made Bush tax cuts permanent. Okay. Budget deal makes permanent 82% of President Bush's tax cuts. Okay. All of the income and capital gains and dividend tax first enacted by President Bush. The state tax levels that was in it, that it was at 2012, and an increase in patching alternative wage tax. The Bush tax cuts through more taxpayers. Okay, all right. So all the income and capital gains and dividend tax cuts first enacted under President Bush, that have been made permanent. This was in 2013, right? Despite the public deciding that they should expire, that these things should expire. The public was in favor of them expiring, but then they were made permanent. So that's an example right there.
Yeah, but was this passed as part of a major legislative bill? Because this might have been a cost of doing something else in legislation, right? So we said that sometimes our Americans are okay with certain things. There might be a cost associated with it, right? So, for instance, if we
Okay.
look at the recent Trump tax cuts in 2017, it might be that the public didn't really like the corporate tax cuts because, as my understanding is that they're generally unpopular with Americans. It might be
Mm.
over 50% with Republicans, but generally these are unpopular. But they might have thought that, like, okay, well, the corporate tax cuts is a cost of the other benefits that we're getting, so we'll support them in that case. That's it's like a cost, right?
Federal tax cuts. Bush, Obama gives way to Republican over Bush tax cuts. Okay. Over Bush tax cuts. Barack Obama is bowing to Republican demands to extend the deep tax cuts for both the Americans to the furious some of the president's allies who say he succumbed to blackmail. In the bruising political battle, Obama stealing Republicans, Congress following the victories. Midterm elections, the president has sought to extend the tax limit by a push 7 years ago, but he wanted to see a return to free on the move would generate trillions of dollars. Okay, leadership. Take a look. Today, Obama said that his priority is to prevent. Okay. That would income. There's serious debate. And Democrats did not hide their frustration with the president. So I'm trying to see if this is all in a one package or a separate package that's attached to it. I don't believe. I believe it was in a separate package that this was made, so it wasn't attached to anything else. Other than like the like it was I believe it was attached to like middle class tax cuts, right?
Mhm.
So, but that in itself, right? Like middle class tax cuts don't cost, like the cost isn't um, wealthy tax cuts, right? Those are two separate things. Like one is not paying for the other, correct?
Um, yeah, no, not necessarily.
Okay, great. So as far as I can tell, these things were that was the compromise here. So I'm just looking over this as quickly as I can. But that was the compromise here. Is that these two things were put together. That Obama wanted to keep the one, so we had to keep the other because there was um, uh, the Republicans.
Somebody's saying the 2012. I don't know if this is true or not because I'm only reading this. You're the
Sure,
one
sure.
looking this up. Someone said the 2012 tax bill only kept tax cuts for people making under 400K. Is that the case?
Under
American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012.
what I'm looking at in terms of the polling talked about uh, should tax cuts for 250K plus be allowed to expire. So 250K between 250 and 400 would be wealthy, right? So that might be the case. So what he's talking about might be the case. Um, and the polling says is that those should have expired. So we might be talking about the same.
Okay, so I'm just reading this real quick. So tax provisions for individuals with taxable income of 400,000 per year or less, 450 for married couples on a joint return. Both thresholds be indexed for inflation. Blah, blah, blah. The top tax rates. I'm sorry. The tax rates for income, capital gains, and dividends remained at their 2012 levels instead of reverting to the higher rates from the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. So that's for people under 400K per year. For individuals with taxable income over the 400,000 a year thresholds, we have the top marginal tax rates on income of 39.6% provided for under the expiration of the 2001 portion of the Bush tax cuts was retained. This was an increase from the 2003-2012 rate of 35%. So that tax bracket went up. The top marginal tax rate on long-term capital gains of 20% provided for under the expiration of 2003 portion of the was retained. That was an increase from the 2003 to 2012 tax rate of 15%. So the capital gains went up. And the top marginal tax rate on dividends, which would have increased to the ordinary income rate of 39.6%, also increased from 15% in 2003 to 2012. So it sounds like those really high, really wealthy, the over 400K earning individuals or 450K earning couples, those tax rates did return back to what they were.
So what I am seeing, and this is a lot of tabs here, is that uh, um, made permanent 82%. That all the income, capital gains, and dividends tax cuts first enacted under President Bush, all those were. So if you have any different source, I'm looking at the Center Budget and Policy Priorities. And
Okay, I linked this in your chat. I'm literally just looking at the Wikipedia article and
yeah,
what the
I'm looking at
American.
I'm looking there, so I don't know what sure.
Um,
So
there you
I'll
go.
link it to you in VC chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
90% of Bush cash allowed to expire. So the 453 billion over 10 years expiration caps, capital gains and dividend tax, and filters for taxable income above 450,000 for America. So that part expired. 1.52 trillion billion expired. 19 billion comes. All right. So President Bush. Okay. So so there might have been multiple levels, right? So like there might have been Bush's tax cuts, and those enacted strictly under him were allowed to be kept, but then anything else was allowed to expire, is what I'm getting from this.
Yeah, so I'm reading your source. Here's the 18% of the Bush tax cuts allowed to expire.
Mm,
So 453 billion over 10 years comes from the expiration of cuts to the income, capital gains, and dividend tax rates for filers with taxable incomes above
mm,
450K. And then 152 billion comes from allowing limits on personal exemptions and itemized deductions to return
mm,
for filers with adjusted gross incomes above 300K. And 19 billion comes from raising the estate tax to 40% from the 35%. So it sounds like they retained a lot that helped, I guess, everybody or was relevant for everybody. And then the 18% that they didn't keep are for the richest people in society, is what it seems like. And I guess this is about probably what I would expect. I imagine there's probably some level of wealthy tax cuts that were made in here as well. But in terms of everything that was cut from the prior Bush tax cuts, seems like all of this was just for the wealthiest earners. Like you've got an estate tax, you've got a limit on exemptions from people that itemize their deductions, which are typically wealthy people, and then you've got the top tax rates for capital gains, dividends, and ordinary income.
yeah. So I'm so so according to public. So the reason why I brought this up is the public polling. Public polling
Mm-hmm.
says everything over 250K should be allowed to expire, right?
Okay.
That's what the public polling says, but that's not what happens. So we can see that even if there is majority support for something, it doesn't necessarily means that it passes, right? So you said
Um,
like you couldn't think of a big legislation where that's the case. So I'm showing a big legislation where that is the case, right? So
Sure. So the kind of research you're doing right now is what caused me to completely and totally flip my opinion.
okay.
Like I'm expecting like bombshells, not like the majority of Americans wanted tax cuts to expire for people making 250K a year and over, but instead it was only 400K a year and over. Like these are not like the major legislative changes that I would expect to see that are different from one to another. But
So but the point is that like if something is whether something is popular or not, whether the public wants it or not, right? Um, so like the fact that it doesn't necessarily it's like not a quote unquote bombshell, right?
well,
That
I wouldn't expect like legislative opinion to follow public opinion 100% perfectly ever. That's probably
okay.
never going to happen, right?
Oh,
Because
okay.
legislatures change a little bit over time. Like some people might have been voted out of office based on what they had. Like some people might not have. Like
Um, Republicans. Uh, oh, yeah. Second, I'm just reading something, please.
mhm.
Yeah, Bush tax cuts earning under the Cliff deal. Okay. Also provisions meaning they expire in a few years. The benefit which are permanent. Okay. Um. So while I'm looking this up, so Stephen, do
Uh-huh.
you think there's no change that they need to be made in terms of uh, corporate influence in politics through
Not
lobbying?
really. No, I don't think so. Nothing that
Zero
I really.
percent. Okay,
No.
interesting, right? So no matter what, no matter how much money, if let's say we quadrupled the amount of money that corporations spent on
Hmm.
politics, you would say that there would not be any sort of change.
I haven't seen like any massively horrible influence. The influence that I thought was there doesn't seem to amount to much. Money doesn't seem to be as strong a predictor as who's going to win as not.
So it's not
And
just
like
who's going to win. Sorry, I'm sorry. Please continue. I apologize. I interrupted
yeah,
you.
and it doesn't seem like it influences legislation anywhere near as much as I thought it did. I
Okay.
think that instead, what I became a lot more woke to is I think the biggest problem we have is just voter turnout. The fact that like if more people voted in more elections, I think that would be the number one change that we would see legislatively across the country. Rather than like doing all this weird side attacks on like corporate money, I think the problem is just the composition of the voter base is just very, very off of the composition of the entire country because certain people are more likely to vote than others.
But if voters feel that the amount of money, right, influencing elections, if they feel the amount of money influencing elections is having influence uh, on their politicians, on their outcomes, right?
Mhm.
If they feel that corporations, and if they see corporations getting benefits that not are not due to them, right? Would that not decrease voter engagement?
I don't know if that would impact voter engagement a lot. I don't know if I believe that.
You don't
Seems
think
like voter engagement is, like, more highly tied into other things. I don't know, I don't think I believe that.
so? If you think so, you don't think that if voters feel that their elected officials are completely unresponsive to them, that
Yeah, but the
that
problem is
would
voters will feel that way even if it's not true. So, like, it doesn't seem like whether or not they're responsive or
so
not matters. If anything, it seems like creating the culture that they're not might be the truly damaging thing. So it seems like maybe if we were to take action against anything, we should take action against people that say that corporate lobbying is the only thing that matters or that your vote doesn't matter or that politicians ignore us. Maybe that's what we need to take action against because if people feel like their vote is disenfranchised, even if it isn't, that might be what drives them to not go vote. Because it seems to be the case that politicians are relatively responsive to what voters want. We just have like the types of people that vote in the United States are not an even cross section of the United States population. It tends to be disproportionately older, whiter, wealthier.
yeah, so okay, um, so I disagree. I disagree with this. I disagree. I think that if voters have a sense, right? And it can be so like perceptions can be different from reality, right? Perceptions
Mhm.
will rule the day, right? So whatever
So we
someone,
should get rid of the perceptions. Yeah.
okay, sure, right? Part of that perception will be affected by the amount of money people see within politics, right? They feel like now there is a perception that there's a lot of backroom deals going on, right? And you would
Yeah, but
say
even
that
if those aren't true, what are we
even
going to
if
do about
those
it?
aren't true, yes, great, right? So I think one, eliminating money in politics would help with that, right? If people felt that the system was more fair, right?
I
Let's
would
say
just rather
so.
do compulsory voting. I think it would be so much better. And this eliminating all money in
So
politics and making it so neo Nazis can now run across the country, I did because it's all publicly
okay,
funded. I
and so socialists. Socialists can also run across the country, right? Communists can also run across the country, like whatever, right? Like other people can run. So like
Mhm.
this neo-Nazi thing that doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, it
Um,
does. I don't want my money funding neo Nazis
Oh, I
running
don't
for
want
office.
my money funding wars, but like that's kind of what it is, right? It's that's how that works, right? So we have so our money supports things that we ourselves, any individual voter may not
Yeah,
like,
but if
right?
I found out that a politician was using my money that went towards the sustaining of the federal government to run their personal like campaign, I would not be happy with that. So if I'm opposed to some war, okay, well that's running the government and running the U.S. military is part of my buy-in to society.
Hmm.
That's a lot different than this politician is embezzling funds that are publicly funded to run their campaign.
Okay, so so embezzling funds, like that's a crime. That's not what we were talking about. Okay, so
No. But I'm saying, so like, for instance, this is a big problem that I
mhm,
had with Trump,
sure.
right? The idea that he started his reelection campaign and was using like his pulpit on the government
Hmm.
to campaign for reelection. That's
Hmm.
absurd to me. That's fucking crazy. I don't think you should be allowed to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. All right, well, I'll just leave that alone. But so yeah, so I see that this idea angers you, right? That people on the far right, or upsets you, excuse me, just upsets you, that people in the far right might be able to use public money, right? To
Or people that have no support otherwise. It could be far right, far left. It could just be any random guy that believes in UFOs. Like the
so,
idea that literally anybody can now run for whatever office because it's all publicly available just seems, yeah.
but the money has no influence according to you. The money has no influence, and it's not a problem, right?
No, no, no. The problem is that they're spending our money. I don't want my money. Like you would have to raise taxes
Okay.
to fund this. Is one, and then two. It's not so much that the money has no influence; is that the influence is now there's going to be a million different people running in every single election. It's probably going
Okay.
to crowd it out.
So yeah, okay. So you don't like crowd elections, and you just don't want your money going to this, right? But that in itself doesn't invalidate this, right? It's simply that
Well,
you
they
prefer
liking it,
you put.
but
Excuse me.
we're both talking about our preference, right?
Yeah.
It
Okay. Sure.
invalidates. Yeah.
Okay. For you. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So let's say I think so. I'm saying the cost is absolutely worth it. Um,
Hmm.
and I would say that on the other end, that in terms of corporate spending, that the corporations would not be doing the spending if they weren't seeing an effect, right? Like if they weren't seeing a positive effect. That corporations are rational, at least when it comes to profit making, and that
Yeah, and they spend a disproportionately a very, very, very low amount of their overall revenue is spent towards lobbying. But go ahead.
yeah, sure, yeah, it's a low amount, proportionally, absolutely. So what? But they wouldn't be doing that spending at all. Um, like,
Well, it seems weird to me that when we look at issues like the energy issue, where we find
mm,
people spending on both sides of things, if there was like so much at stake here, why wouldn't they spend more, right? To buy off all the other
maybe
adversaries.
because what their current amount of spending is sufficient.
How can that be the case if they're taking a contraposition of another like lobbying, like for the green energy thing, right? You've got people lobbying on both sides and they spend about the same amount of money. Why wouldn't they dramatically outspend their opponents if there was so much money to be earned here doing it?
So one, the clean firms, right, are again those are um, the ones that. So it could be one that their policy positions aren't always in contradiction, right? Like how energy markets are run, right? Like that might not be like in contradiction to one another, right? So in fact, that they're working together on some issues, right, and opposed to other issues. That's one thing, right? It's that fossil fuels have been in this business of corporate lobbying for much longer the clean energy firms, so they don't see the need to increase massively, right? Increase massively their spending. Why would they, right? Because they have built these relationships, they have built this infrastructure, right? They're massively ahead. They may not increase. It could be the case that um, at some point the um, that in terms of like revenue, right? Like the clean firms are not seeing like the spending an increased amount currently is not a benefit to them. So maybe it will be a benefit to them in the future, but not at this very moment, right? Um, so there's could be all kinds of reasons why one group of firms doesn't outspend other group of firms, right? Their interests could align in some places, right? And then increasing spending on other particular issues are not, at least at this moment, maybe an uphill battle that's just too much for them to climb, right? Or it's just otherwise they feel like it's not worth the cost, right? That doesn't mean that like in the future or that in other areas that they aren't seeing a positive result, right? Did that
Okay.
make sense to you?
I understand it. It's just all hypotheticals and potentials, and we're talking about like a huge change in the system to stop something that might hypothetically be a problem that I feel like hasn't been really demonstrated.
Okay. Um, I think you found
Like, it doesn't seem to be the case that, like, Amazon and Walmart are writing legislation in the United States contrary to the interests of the average American. It doesn't seem to be the case that billionaires can just buy their way through elections. It doesn't seem to be the case that the president's agenda, like, strictly lines up with corporations when you look at, like, politically popular policies that are corporate unpopular. So things like restricting immigration or things like tariffs, like, I don't know.
and I agree that that would be the case because those have massive public attention, right? So that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't perfectly match up. I've said that from the start, right?
Sure, I
That
guess. But then again, then we're back in the weird world where the only policies you can argue about are the ones that nobody knows about, so then it's hard for any argument to be made that proves anything there, right?
unless we unless we see those actual the agenda of those corporations actually being carried out, right? So if it's actually being carried out, then we can see that there is some effect, right? And that they wouldn't be spending this money if they weren't getting results. If no results were ever being made, right? So if yeah, so if they realize that their money can be spent in other places, like creating a better product, right, and that would generate them more money than through lobbying, then that's what they would do, because
Mhm.
that's how they operate.
Sure.
So they are seeing the benefit, right? They are seeing within these regulations, right, the ones that we may not understand, right, that they're seeing a positive effect, right? So this is a net benefit for them, right? And on the other side, those any other priorities like increasing school funding, right? Like saving finches. I don't know, like some sort of group of finches that are going to be extinct, right? That might be
Mhm.
inconvenient, economically inconvenient for some drilling company, right? Those things aren't presented. Those policies aren't
Even
getting
on
more
those
attention.
things, like, it just people just don't wanna spend. Like, look at how many people support, like, raising teacher wages, but don't support, like, raises in their property taxes, you know? Like, I don't think there's any weird corporate influence there, it's just people just don't like the cost associated with things.
People don't like the cost associated with lots of things, but that doesn't mean they're not in favor of those policies, right? And then there's not a campaign on
You're
the other
not in
side, a
favor of a
corporate
policy
campaign.
if you're not willing to take on the costs. I reject that, I don't
Okay,
think so.
but people on the other side, there isn't a corporate campaign. Sorry, a money campaign saying like, oh, hey, this is important. These are the benefits, right? So like, even if there is some sort of uh, uh, great cost on one side, there isn't a corporate a campaign on the other side saying, hey, these are what you'll gain. Like this is all the benefits that'll come with this. So these things aren't equal in voters' minds, is what I'm saying, right? Like,
Okay. I understand your point. I just there's like you have to make such a convoluted argument to get there. Like why is it that the United States, if we wanted to overthrow countries, why wouldn't we just start pumping a ton of money to political punts? Why would we do like violent overthrows or supporting like fascist regimes or whatever? Why wouldn't we just have corporations send money there? Now all of a sudden we win because money controls everything. Like it just seems like a very naive like outlook on politics. I think that it's not I just think that what we were trying to do is we just don't want to grapple with ourselves as voters and we don't want to be honest about what people actually want. And we just say corporation bad and like that's the boogeyman that we can blame everything on. And then it makes all of our jobs really easy. Oh, well, now all we have to do
don't
is fight against corporations. And
first of
now
all,
we absolve ourselves of all responsibilities. We absolve voters of all responsibilities. We don't have to deal with the tough fact that there is actually a legitimate difference in opinion in the country about what policies people want. And instead, we can just pretend everybody wants the same thing. It's just evil companies that are blocking the way.
don't we
That's what I feel
don't
like.
we use military spending? Don't we support other countries, right? Through military spending. That's one way we can support them. We can send money over there, right, to affect their elections.
Yeah, but we're
Okay,
not just
this
funding
continues.
corporations to like
Not just
change how people view and write legislation via corporations, right? Like it's
sorry. Like you're saying that the U.S. government sending money, right? Like you're saying that I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, because we sent if we want to get a government to do something, right, to follow what we want them to do, right, to line
look
up
how
with
much
our
money we pumped into
interests, we
Afghanistan.
can.
Look how much money we pumped into Iraq. We were still unpopular there. Like both countries wanted the U.S. forces to leave. At least the citizens did. Like I think that just like saying like oh well money buys everything in corporations. I just think it's just I just don't
I
think that
didn't.
it
I didn't
holds
say money
true.
buys everything, right? I said that money helps influence politicians, right? I say that it changes what their legislative priorities are. Um, so, like, uh, yeah, we pump money into right wing dictatorships for like actions that are favorable to big business, right? We do these things. Um, so I don't know on that point. I don't know why you're saying that. Like we don't pump money. Like we can use bombs or we can use money. Those are two things that we can do. Um, and in terms of
So you think
like
if I just paid
if
off like every
Afghanistan.
member, if I just paid off like legislative members in like fucking India or whatever, I could get them to completely 180 their opinion on stuff related to like Pakistan, or like, well, I just don't think that realistically this happens. I think that politicians, and if this was going to happen, if this was the case, then I think that what you would see is a massive rejection by the voters of people in parliament.
So
Like,
and
people have tried to make these same arguments over and over again. Fuentes made this argument at the 64 Hart Seller Immigration Act, or 65 Hart Seller Immigration, where he tried to say, like, oh, politicians voted in ways that none of the population wanted. But when you go and look up the voter data, like, generally people are generally in favor of what their politicians are doing. And then when there are big rejections, then there are electoral consequences.
so and
So for instance, okay, go ahead.
no, okay. So I was just going to give you an example. That in one of the ones I sent you, either was the DA example or the um, I think it was the other example in terms of Dodd-Frank regulation, right?
Sure, the
That
Dodd-Frank one was a
that
really bad example because we don't
that
even know if the public would have been against that. And same thing with the DEA
but
one. We don't even know if the public would have been against it.
I'm saying that so my point is that um, it was in one of those examples there was like a floor vote, like a unanimous floor vote, right? Or that it passed through, right? Um, and that simply that money, putting that the money behind it, and those corporations providing that support, right? Put that bill um, into place and let it just pass. So they backed people who already believed in their legislative position, and then it passed. So it's some screw rule, right? That the public is not paying attention to, or the politicians aren't paying it, right? And now that passes, right, without any, and no one realizes until afterward, until this is this media report, right? And then people are like, oh no, like this is a big problem.
I don't think anybody was saying, "Oh no," though. Nobody has any idea. Nobody knows what the average American doesn't even know what the fucking derivative is.
I'm
Like,
I'm saying that other politicians were saying um, that they weren't in support of it. They were unaware of these things, and then it passed on. I can look at it again. Mm, 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 68 out of 7. Mm, okay. Mm, okay. Um. So. Uh. So both Manchin and McCaskill, however, this is for the DEA one actually, were among the senators who allowed the bill to pass by unanimous consent in the Senate without even a vote. McCaskill's office initially told CNN and later Monday the senator. Okay, let me avoid that.
Baby girl.
Night.
Um, yeah. So these people are stating that they weren't actually even aware, right? So this was pushed, right, by a group, by a certain a group of senators, right? This bill was pushed by them, and it was passed by other senators who had no idea, right? Because this wasn't a
yeah,
salient.
most senators probably don't know anything about financial markets. That's not surprising to me.
Exactly. Okay. They don't know. No. Sorry. No. This is not on the financial market one. This is the DA one. This is DEA.
Oh, most probably don't know anything about pharmaceuticals either. Most people in Congress are fucking stupid.
We
That
we
wouldn't surprise me either, but
we acknowledge that, but this thing went by, right? So you find people who support, right, and they will push your legislation as you write it, right? Um, they will write as you write it because of that the influence of that money, right? Rather than pushing anything else. Um, oh, okay. Okay. 1 second. Mm, people are yeah, issue. So yeah. Mm, let's just bring this for um, yeah, okay. So I guess we have just a fundamental disagreement here, a few fundamental disagreements, which is okay, which is fine.
Mhm.
Um, because I don't understand why is the fact that people who are ignorant on these policy issues a reason why corporate influence is okay, right?
Well, because if
Right.
if it was absent that, maybe it would just be no influence, and then we'd be getting legislation that's fucking horrible for America.
Sure. Would there, so that doesn't mean there'd be no influence, right? So the public can still lobby their Congress, right? So here,
Yeah, but there
so
needs to be balance on both sides, and experts that work in industries are probably important. If Americans had it their way, fucking all derivative markets might be banned, and like all short selling might be banned, and the whole fucking stock market might be banned. Like, I don't know. Like there probably needs to be some level of influence on the other side.
I
Like there's a lot
agree.
of people that thinks the entire stock market is like a worthless rigged game and it shouldn't even exist. So it's
I
like, okay, well, holy shit, like
I agree there should be influence on the other side, that there be the interest of the public. I would say that, yeah, that's fine. That I'm not opposed to uh, corporate interference, right? Corporate interests known, being able to put resistance up within Congress, right? That doesn't bother me, right? That they do that. What bothers me is that they have an advantage through the money. That's the problem. That's all. That's all it is, right? So there are competing interests within any government, with any group, with any organization, right? And you have to balance the interests of different stakeholders, right? But one stakeholder, if a certain set of stakeholders has a massive advantage, some sort of structural advantage over the others, right? And that's where the issue is.
okay, I understand.
All right.
I agree, but for me, I would have to see that advantage is being used in a way that's detrimental to the American public or contrary to their opinion. Then I would care. But until that's demonstrated, I just don't care much about it. I think there are other more important changes that can be made first.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It seems to be just a fundamental disagreement here. That's all right. Mm. How you
What's your
doing?
next panel gonna be on?
What, that I'm gonna be on, or that you're gonna be on?
That you're gonna be on? What's your next panel on?
I have a fucking clue. I don't know. I add these things later.
Well, don't you have like weekly? Don't you have like the Lily Amazon thing? Don't you have
Oh,
the?
so I have the Reverie. That's so Reverie on Monday. Amazon Lily. Reverie is our general politics discussion. Lily is focused on women and trans issues oftentimes. All
Mhm.
Black Everything panels focus on Black issues, right? I hope we can figure that out. And then we have our Time Morale, which is our game show type thing that happens on Saturdays. And then 6 days a week we have an open panel where we discuss anything. So that's my schedule. Um,
Okay, gotcha. Well, I mean, we'll link your stuff. I appreciate the conversation. Do you have any other final parting words or anything for us?
um,
Wait, what time Monday night is your panel? The Reverie?
Reverie 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Eastern. Everything starts at 8 p.m. Eastern. Well, those closed panels. Um, and I have a schedule on my Twitch page if you want to take a look at that. But I would say I would leave it up to the audience. Um, I think so. I'm gonna try to reach out an olive branch to you, Stephen. Right? Yeah, no. So I'm just gonna reach out an olive branch with our closing statement here. Um, is that I think that in terms of proving these links, it's extremely difficult. Right? These things aren't very obvious. Um, I think that all in all, though, if you look at the body of work done showing corporate influence, is that their priorities get are at the top, right? That they get top billing in whatever legislative agenda that there is. I think
Mhm.
that itself is a problem. You don't think that's a problem because you think that overall this might not go against public interest. I would say that corporate interests oftentimes don't align with a public interest, right? I think, for instance, the Disney example is one way in which when our cultural artifacts are literally decaying in front of our eyes, but that's as a clear example of these interests deferring, right? Like, so Disney needs to protect it's IP, right? And on the other hand, people want to protect these myriad of cultural artifacts that are going to disappear before Mickey Mouse is in public domain. Um, so uh, I, but I see your point. I do see your point that that changing the system, right, requires a massive amount of effort, and it's difficult to get buy-in on that if you can't draw these direct links. So if there isn't a guy within a room, a back room, like handing over money to a politician stuffing his pockets, right? Then how do you get the public to buy into these things, right? When a lot of these things that are being affected, right? Not always. Sometimes it's bigger things, but a lot of things are being affected are things that aren't at top of mind, right? Aren't the most salient, right? Like I care about my healthcare, I care about my job, I care about my environment at some point, or vaguely, right? I care about the environment. I care about my food safety, right? I care about these things, right? But maybe the minutia of food safety, I think the actual like regulations behind it. Well, I don't know. I don't really know, right? I have no idea. And how that's run. I'm just gonna leave it up to the politicians, right? But like, do something good with food safety, right? So how do you prove? How do you prove that within our system um, that if a politician would have, if a politician was going to uh, change a food safety policy, right, that seems to benefit corporations, that they absolutely would not have done that otherwise, right? Well, I would say that the proof is in um, the overall lobbying market, right? The fact that that these corporations feel the need that like they should indeed make these investments for these benefits, right? That in itself is a problem. That there is no proper balance, like the corporate public balance, with corporate balance and balance between what private citizens want. Like that balance is completely shattered by the amount of money on one side, okay? So that speech simply drowns out everything else, and that in itself is a public harm. Um, so I think, mm, yeah. So I that's why I contend that itself is a public harm. You don't seem to agree with me on all those points, but that's okay. I leave it up to your audience. Like, do you think that's a problem? Do you think it's a problem that one side floods out the other? Because I think it does. I think on the whole, then there are other priorities that you may find important that simply aren't going to be taken care of. It's just not going to happen because legislative priorities are skewed to corporations with that flow of money. I'll give you the last word in case you want to say anything else. But I think I summarized what you were saying before.
Yeah. Say that like if we really felt like legislative priorities are being ignored so hard, you would expect to see voters punishing politicians for it. So, for instance, we have seen times where it seems like voters were unhappy with politicians, and when it happens, then you see like a huge wave of politicians getting ousted. So, for instance, in response to the '94 crime bill, I think a lot of the country was unhappy with the assault weapons ban provision of that, and Democrats were punished harshly in the next legislative section under the ACA under Obama's administration. It seemed like that was something that there was a great deal of political capital expended on. You saw Democrats being punished under that government legislatively when people being voted out. It seems like if people really disagree with things that politicians are doing, eventually they'll start to see consequences for that in office. The idea that a politician can just do something that's unpopular or on the fringes over and over and over again because of corporate backing, there just doesn't seem to be any like good example of that other than fringe, like this small exception to this larger piece of legislation got pushed by a corporation and there's no evidence that anybody was even opposed to it. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I'll leave it at that then. Destiny, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Well, I love you. Be careful. Okay.
Have a
Bye.
good one.